Section 1. 1,500 words. My name is Kendra. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful luxury asset manager, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, I returned from a grueling business trip in Dubai, exhausted and ready to go home. I took an Uber Black to my parents' house in Buckhead to pick up my car. When I walked into the driveway, my matty black McLaren was gone. I walked inside to find my father Vernon smirking over a glass of expensive bourbon. "You know, Kendra, you are lucky we even include you," he said, chuckling. "I sold your car. Your brother needed a vacation." I simply walked to the bar, poured myself a sparkling water and smiled. He demanded to know how I could be so calm. I looked him dead in the eye and told him exactly who that car belonged to. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta meant everything was about keeping up appearances. To the outside world, my parents Vernon and Beatrice were pillars of the community. They were senior elders at a massive, incredibly wealthy megachurch, and their entire existence revolved around projecting an image of flawless prosperity and divine favor. But inside our sprawling brick mansion, emotional coldness and blatant favoritism permeated every corner. Our house was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet, primarily because I was not born a boy, and more specifically because I was not my younger brother Darius. For my entire life, Darius was the undisputed golden child. At 28 years old, he was a perpetual failure who masked his incompetence behind the shiny facade of hustle culture. He had launched and bankrupted no less than 10 different startup companies. There was the luxury sneaker line that never saw production, the exclusive dating app that crashed on launch day, and most recently, a cryptocurrency token that completely collapsed, leaving him in massive debt. Yet in my parents' eyes, Darius was just a misunderstood genius experiencing temporary setbacks. They celebrated his failures as stepping stones while entirely ignoring my actual tangible success. I had taken a vastly different path. I worked 80-hour weeks to build my career from the ground up, eventually becoming a highly sought-after luxury asset manager for ultra-high net worth individuals. I managed exclusive properties, rare art collections, and high-end vehicles for billionaires. My husband Julian was a senior corporate lawyer. We had built a quiet, fiercely protected life together in a highly secure penthouse downtown. We did not ask my parents for anything, and in return they viewed my independence as a personal insult. They constantly criticized me for being a childless workaholic who cared more about corporate clients than family loyalty. This brings me back to last Sunday. I had been in Dubai for 2 weeks finalizing a complex asset transfer for a royal client. Because the secure parking garage at my penthouse building was undergoing structural renovations, I had made the rare decision to park a promotional vehicle at my parents' gated estate. It was a customized matte black McLaren, a magnificent piece of engineering worth over $300,000. It was not my personal vehicle. I was managing it exclusively for a client, keeping it safe until an upcoming high-profile charity auction. My parents lived in a gated community with round-the-clock security, making it a logical, albeit temporary, storage solution. When my Uber Black pulled through the wrought iron gates of their estate, the oppressive Georgia heat was heavy in the air. I dragged my luggage up the pristine cobblestone driveway, my mind entirely focused on getting my keys and heading home to Julian. I looked toward the specific corner of the sprawling driveway where I had parked the McLaren under a custom car cover. The spot was entirely empty. There was no cover, there was no car, just a patch of bare concrete baking in the afternoon sun. A sharp spike of adrenaline hit my chest. My immediate thought was that Julian had decided to surprise me and pick it up early, but a quick text to him confirmed he was still at his law firm preparing for a trial. Confusion morphed into a deep, unsettling dread. I rolled my suitcase up the front steps and unlocked the heavy mahogany front door. The house smelled of expensive lavender diffusers and roasted lamb. From the formal living room, I heard the distinct clinking of crystal glasses and the low, self-satisfied rumble of my father laughing. I left my suitcase in the foyer and walked into the room. Vernon and Beatrice were sitting on their custom white leather sofas. My father held a generous pour of aged bourbon, looking incredibly pleased with himself. My mother was scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. Neither of them offered a welcome home or asked about my 14-hour flight. "Where's the car?" I asked, skipping any pretense of a greeting. My voice was completely flat, betraying none of the panic that was beginning to pulse through my veins. Vernon took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. He set the glass down on a coaster and leaned back, crossing his legs. He looked at me with a smirk that I had despised since childhood. "We need to talk about family responsibilities, Kendra," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "I do not want to lecture, Dad. I asked a very simple question. Where is the McLaren?" My mother finally looked up from her phone. She adjusted her designer cardigan and gave me a look of profound disappointment. "Do not take that tone with your father," she scolded. "You should be sitting down. We made a family decision today, and you need to understand that it was for the greater good." "A family decision regarding a vehicle that does not belong to you?" I countered, my eyes darting between the two of them. Vernon chuckled, a harsh, dismissive sound. "That car has been sitting in my driveway for 2 weeks collecting dust. You have more money than you know what to do with, Kendra. You and Julian live in that absurd penthouse while your own flesh and blood is struggling." "I sold the car." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a second, my brain refused to process the sentence. "You sold a car that you do not own." "It is just a material possession," Beatrice chimed in, weaponizing her church elder persona with effortless cruelty. "God commands us to help our blood. Your brother has been in a very dark place. His crypto business is facing some unfair hurdles, and the stress has been destroying him. Furthermore, Tasha has been suffering from severe anxiety. She desperately needed a break to focus on her mental health." Tasha was Darius's wife, a woman whose entire existence revolved around projecting a fake luxury lifestyle on social media. She despised me, frequently calling me a broke auntie online, simply because I refused to flaunt designer labels or fund her shopping sprees. I took a slow breath, feeling a dangerous calm wash over me. "You sold a car to pay for Tasha's mental health break?" Vernon smiled, clearly mistaking my shock for submission. "I found a buyer. A private collector I met through a mutual acquaintance. He deals in high-end vehicles, and he was willing to pay $150,000 in cash, no questions asked. I knew you would not agree, so I handled the paperwork myself. I have a guy at the DMV who pushed the title transfer through." "Do not act like this is a tragedy, Kendra. You can just buy another one with your fancy corporate money." Beatrice nodded enthusiastically. "It is already done. We wired the money to Darius an hour ago. He and Tasha are packing right now. They are heading to Bora Bora for a 2-week luxury retreat. It is exactly what they need to heal and reset. You should be happy that your excess could bless your family." They sat there completely self-righteous, genuinely believing that their status in the church and their parental authority shielded them from the laws of reality. They had committed grand theft, auto-forged documents, and fenced a stolen vehicle to a black market buyer, all to fund a lavish vacation for an adult man who refused to get a job. I thought back to my early 20s when I was struggling to pay rent while starting my career. I had humbly asked my parents for a $500 loan to avoid eviction. They had laughed in my face, told me to pray on it, and advised me that financial struggle builds character. Now they felt entitled to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from me to pay for an island getaway. "Why are you not saying anything?" Vernon demanded, his smirk faltering slightly as my silence stretched on. He expected me to scream. He expected me to cry, to throw a tantrum, to act like the hysterical, difficult daughter they always claimed I was. He wanted an emotional reaction so he could call me unstable. Instead, I walked over to the home bar. I picked up a bottle of sparkling water, twisted off the cap, and poured myself a glass. The gentle fizzing sound was the only noise in the room. I took a slow sip, enjoying the cold refreshment after my long journey. I turned back to them and smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile. Vernon stood up, his face reddening with sudden anger. Are you ignoring me? I just told you that your car paid for the whole family's fun vacation and you just stand there drinking water. How can you be so calm? I set the glass down gently on the marble counter. I looked directly into his furious eyes. Because, Dad? I replied, my voice steady and deadly quiet. The car you just sold did not belong to me. You did not just forge my signature. You forged the signature of a corporate entity, and you stole a highly monitored asset. Vernon scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Please. You always try to make things sound more complicated than they are. It was your car. You drove it here. I shook my head slowly, letting the reality of their catastrophic mistake settle into the room. No, Dad. I was holding it for a client. The vehicle you just sold to a black market fence is actually owned by the Titan Entertainment Group. Furthermore, because of its extreme value, it is equipped with military-grade tracking and remote shutdown protocols. I just sent a signal from my phone while you were talking. The engine is completely dead, and the authorities have already been automatically notified of a stolen asset. The color drained from Vernon's face. The expensive bourbon in his glass suddenly trembled as my words finally pierced through his impenetrable arrogance. Vernon forced a harsh, booming bark of laughter into the heavy air, desperately trying to reassemble his shattered composure. He slammed his crystal highball glass onto the expensive marble coaster with enough force to crack the ice cubes spinning inside. The amber liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine surface, but he did not seem to care. He puffed out his chest, attempting to inflate his authority to match the sheer physical size of the room. Titan Entertainment Group. He mocked, waving a dismissive, heavy hand in my direction. You honestly think you can come into my house, disrespect me under my own roof, and intimidate me with some meaningless corporate jargon? I am a respected man in this city, Kendra. I sit on the board of the largest congregation in Buckhead. I know exactly how the real world works. You do not just snap your fingers and summon federal agents over a minor internal family misunderstanding. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored navy blazer, pulled out a thickly folded stack of official-looking documents, and tossed them carelessly onto the glass coffee table. The papers landed with a sharp, heavy slap that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I have the official transfer papers sitting right there, he gloated, pointing a thick, manicured finger at the documents. Signed, sealed, and legally processed. Do you think I am an idiot? I did not just stumble through this transaction blindly. I used Marcus down at the DMV. He is a loyal brother from our congregation. He pushed the paperwork through the system this very morning. As far as the great state of Georgia is concerned, that vehicle belongs to the buyer now. There is no corporate asset problem. There is no theft. You are simply throwing a tantrum because your little brother is finally getting the luxury treatment he so richly deserves, and you cannot handle the fact that you were not the one to provide it. I looked down at the forged documents resting on the glass table. I did not even need to lean closer or touch them to know exactly how catastrophically poorly executed they were. Marcus from the congregation, I repeated slowly, letting the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of his master plan wash over the room. You used a low-level, easily traceable DMV clerk to forge the transfer of a limited edition supercar, a vehicle that is not even registered in the state of Georgia, Dad. It is registered to a corporate holding company operating out of Delaware. The title is heavily encumbered by corporate liens and insurance mandates that require board-level authorization to transfer. I unzipped the front leather pocket of my travel tote and methodically pulled out my iPad Pro. The magnetic case snapped open loudly, the sound sharp in the suddenly quiet room. You see, Dad, when you deal with assets of this extreme caliber, the rules of your little suburban street hustle do not apply. This is not a used sedan you can just flip for quick cash to fund a tropical getaway. I unlocked the screen using my facial recognition and immediately launched the proprietary security application provided by Titan Entertainment Group's private security division. The interface glowed with a harsh, clinical blue light, I turned the bright screen around and placed it gently on top of his forged transfer papers, effectively burying his fake reality under undeniable digital proof. On the screen, a highly detailed real-time satellite map of the Greater Atlanta metropolitan area was displayed. A pulsating crimson dot was clearly visible, currently moving south at high speed on Interstate 85. That red dot is the McLaren. I explained, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any anger or panic. And that specific dot is currently broadcasting a level 1 distress signal directly to a private security firm contracted by Titan. You really thought a $300,000 promotional vehicle was just sitting under a tarp in a driveway with absolutely no oversight? The very second that car was started without my required biometric authorization, the system logged a critical security breach. Vernon stared down at the screen. The arrogant smugness completely drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of dawning horror. He watched the little red dot inch its way down the digital highway, his eyes tracking its movement, as if he were watching a bomb tick down to zero. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seemed to have seized up. No words came out. "Let me explain to you exactly what you sold today." I continued, pacing slowly across the plush Persian rug, my heels clicking softly. That car is equipped with military-grade anti-theft protocols. It possesses redundant GPS trackers hidden deep inside the chassis where they cannot be manually disabled. It has audio recording fail-safes that trigger upon unauthorized entry, and a remote engine immobilization system designed to safely disable the vehicle during high-speed pursuits. It is not just a car. It is a highly monitored, heavily insured vault on wheels. The buyer you found did not purchase a vehicle. He purchased a very expensive, extremely loud tracking device that is currently transmitting his exact location speed and trajectory directly to a secure server in Washington. Beatrice, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally stood up. Her designer silk cardigan slipped off her shoulders and pooled on the white leather sofa, but she did not seem to notice. Her hands were shaking violently. "You are bluffing!" she screamed, her voice shrill, ragged, and desperate. "You are just trying to scare us because you are jealous. You have always been insanely jealous of Darius. You cannot stand the thought of him enjoying a beautiful, relaxing trip with his wife, while you sit around obsessing over your soulless corporate job. You are making up all this tracking nonsense to ruin his blessing." "I am not bluffing, Mom," I said smoothly, stepping back toward the coffee table. I leaned over and tapped a specific brightly colored icon on the top right corner of the iPad screen. A stark red warning prompt immediately appeared requesting secondary confirmation to activate the remote immobilization protocol. "I'm just doing my job. A job that requires me to protect my client's assets from thieves." I tapped the confirmation button. The iPad emitted a sharp, loud, piercing confirmation beep that echoed violently off the high ceilings of the formal living room. The sound was deafening, a digital gavel striking down on their delusions. A green checkmark flashed across the screen, confirming the command had been successfully transmitted and received by the vehicle's onboard computer. "I just locked the engine," I announced, picking up the iPad and sliding it smoothly back into my tote bag. "The vehicle will now safely decelerate, pull to the shoulder, and then completely shut down. The electronic doors will remain deadlocked from the inside until law enforcement arrives with the correct override code. And yes, before you even attempt to ask, I have already reported the asset as officially stolen to the federal authorities." Titan Entertainment Group operates across multiple state lines, which automatically makes this grand theft auto a federal matter entirely out of the jurisdiction of your local police buddies. Beatrice lunged forward, closing the distance between us in a frantic blur of motion. She grabbed my forearm with a vice-like bruising grip. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug painfully into my skin through the fabric of my blouse. "Cancel it," she commanded, her eyes wide with a terrifying, unhinged mix of blinding rage and absolute panic. "Call them right now and tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them you gave us permission to move the car. You are not going to ruin your brother's trip over your petty, vindictive jealousy. You will pick up your phone, you will call those people, and you will fix this instantly. Kendra, do you hear me? I looked down at her hand, violently gripping my arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers and then shifted my gaze directly into her frantic, pleading eyes. I let the silence stretch out thick and heavy until she finally realized that her physical intimidation, the very same tactic she had used to bully me when I was a teenager, meant absolutely nothing to the woman standing before her now. "Let go of me!" I demanded, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that brokered no debate. Beatrice gasped, her breath catching in her throat, as she slowly released her grip, taking a hesitant, unsteady step backward. She looked at her own hands, as if she did not recognize them. "You are completely insane," Vernon stammered, running a shaking hand over his sweating forehead. His confident posture had completely collapsed. "We are your parents. We are highly respected elders in the church. We have an immaculate reputation to uphold in this community. If the police get involved in this, if this gets out to the congregation, it will ruin everything we have built. You are going to call that corporate office right this second and tell them you made a scheduling error. You will tell them the car is perfectly fine. We will figure out how to get the money back to the buyer later, but you must stop the police right now." They were still desperately trying to gaslight me, even with the undeniable concrete reality of federal charges literally staring them in the face. They fundamentally believed they could simply order me to bend the world to their will. They truly believed their authority as my parents. Their status in their megachurch superseded the law, the truth, and my own professional livelihood. "There is no canceling this, Dad," I replied, standing tall as I watched their entire fabricated world begin to brutally crumble around them. When a corporation like Titan files a stolen asset report for a vehicle worth more than most people's homes, it triggers an automated response grid. The local police, the state highway patrol, and the FBI's Interstate Theft Division are all notified simultaneously. The wheels are already turning rapidly, and absolutely nothing I say or do will stop them now. Beatrice began to aggressively hyperventilate, clutching her chest. "You are doing this on purpose. You planned this to destroy us. You deliberately parked that car here just to set a trap for your own family. How could you be so evil to your own flesh and blood? I parked it here because your driveway is securely gated and my building's garage is under construction," I said, shaking my head at her desperate, pathetic mental gymnastics. "You chose to break into my secure lockbox. You chose to forge my signature on legal documents. You chose to involve a church member in a verifiable felony. You chose to sell a stolen vehicle to a black market fence. And you chose to send the illicit funds to Darius. I did not set a trap. You built one yourselves meticulously, piece by piece, and then you jumped right in." Vernon pointed a trembling, desperate finger toward the front door. "Fix this, Kendra. If you do not fix this right now, you are dead to us. We will cut you out of this family forever. You will never set foot in this house again." The sheer audacity of his threat almost made me laugh out loud. They were holding a burning bridge over their heads and threatening to drop it on me. I calmly reached down and wrapped my hand securely around the leather handle of my rolling suitcase. I adjusted my designer blazer, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I looked down at my watch, noting the exact time their empire began to irreversibly collapse. Federal agents do not cancel investigations for church elders. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, panicked air of the living room. "And they certainly do not care about your luxury family vacations." Without waiting for another frantic command or delusional threat, I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy front door. My hand had barely touched the heavy brushed brass handle of the front door when a sharp, incredibly aggressive ringtone shattered the suffocating silence of the foyer. It was Vernon's personal cell phone vibrating violently against the thick glass coffee table where his forged documents lay scattered like useless trash. The caller identification flashed brightly on the screen in stark, angry letters. It read, "T-Bone Auto Imports." Vernon stared at the glowing device as if it had suddenly burst into bright, consuming flames right there in his immaculate living room. He hesitated, his broad chest heaving with mounting panic. He snatched the phone up with a trembling hand, swiping the screen to answer and pressing it tightly against his ear. He did not even get a single chance to utter a greeting. Even from across the vast expanse of the tiled foyer, I could clearly hear the explosive, furious screaming bleeding out of the tiny earpiece. The voice on the other end was intensely rough, completely panicked, and heavily accented with raw street rage. Vernon's eyes widened to the size of dinner saucers as he listened to the man completely lose his mind over the failed criminal transaction. The shady buyer, the notorious Atlanta black market luxury car flipper, who had foolishly believed he'd just scored the absolute deal of a lifetime, was currently hopelessly trapped. The angry buyer screamed into the phone that he was currently sitting dead in the middle of Interstate 85. He vividly described how the matte black McLaren had suddenly jerked violently, the massive engine whining in loud protest before completely seizing up at exactly 70 miles per hour. He had barely managed to wrestle the heavy, entirely unpowered machine onto the gravel shoulder before the digital dashboard turned a blinding crimson. The man shouted hysterically that the interior cabin was now completely deadlocked. The tinted windows would not roll down an inch, and the central display screen was flashing a massive, inescapable warning message. Stolen asset, federal authorities dispatched, remain in vehicle. The trapped buyer threatened Vernon with immediate severe physical violence. He furiously demanded his $150,000 back within the next hour, aggressively promising to send his armed associates directly to the Buckhead house to collect the cash forcefully if Vernon dared to play any stupid games with his money or his freedom right here today. Vernon desperately tried to stammer out a pathetic excuse, but the furious man abruptly hung up the call, leaving a loud dial tone that echoed hollowly in the cavernous living room. Vernon weakly dropped the expensive phone back onto the glass table. His large hands were shaking so severely he could barely clasp them together to steady himself. He looked over at me, his face entirely devoid of blood, completely stripped of his earlier towering arrogance. He was rapidly hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps, as the crushing reality of his criminal actions finally crashed violently down now. Before Vernon could even attempt to form a single coherent sentence, Beatrice's phone chirped cheerfully from the depths of her designer purse. It was an incoming FaceTime request. The bright screen lit up with Tasha's name. Beatrice, desperate for any possible distraction from the impending legal disaster unfolding in her home, practically dove for the phone and quickly accepted the video call. She held the screen up high, and Tasha's face immediately filled the display, beaming with obnoxious, highly performative joy. Tasha was currently live streaming directly to her numerous social media followers from the Delta FYP lounge right now. She was broadcasting live from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. She held her phone high in the air, slowly panning around the exclusive room to show off the complimentary premium champagne and the plush leather seating areas. Right behind her, a massive mountain of brand-new, heavily logoed Louis Vuitton luggage sat stacked precariously on a brass luggage cart. Tasha flipped the camera lens back to herself, leaning in extremely close to the microphone. She loudly addressed her captive followers, her high-pitched voice dripping with toxic venom and completely artificial sweetness as she flaunted her stolen wealth online today. She endlessly gloated about her impromptu, fully funded luxury getaway to the pristine beaches of Bora Bora. She made a deliberate point to repeatedly and loudly thank her incredibly generous, wonderfully wealthy family members for finally recognizing her true worth and funding her mental health break. Then the inevitable, predictable attack came. Tasha looked directly into the camera lens and began ruthlessly mocking me by my first name. She openly called me a broke, hopelessly bitter auntie who spent her entire sad life serving extremely wealthy people instead of ever actually being rich or successful in her own absolute right. She laughed obnoxiously loudly, telling her gullible audience that maintaining fierce family loyalty always pays off in the end. Unlike choosing a sad, incredibly lonely corporate career, managing other people's money. She proudly paraded her fresh glittering manicure in front of the camera lens, aggressively bragging that experiencing real generational wealth meant never having to actually work for anyone else ever again. I stood silently in the grand foyer, my hand still resting lightly on the cold brass doorknob, quietly watching the entire pathetic, delusional display unfold on the small screen from across the large, lavishly decorated living space today. I remained completely unfazed by her petty insults. I truly felt no anger whatsoever toward Tasha, only a profound, deeply clinical pity for her supreme ignorance. She was gleefully dancing to loud music on the top deck of a rapidly sinking ship, completely oblivious to the massive jagged hole currently being ripped into the hull beneath her feet. Beatrice desperately tried to speak, to quickly warn her oblivious daughter to stop broadcasting their location and crimes immediately, but her dry voice completely failed her. Vernon had fully collapsed back onto the pristine white leather sofa cushions, looking completely destroyed now. He was tightly clutching his chest, his breathing incredibly loud and highly erratic as he helplessly watched his stolen money being brazenly flaunted on a public live broadcast. Tasha happily continued her incredibly smug monologue, entirely unaware that the very funds paying for her premium lounge champagne were currently the subject of an active federal grand theft auto investigation. Tasha finally ended the live stream with a blown kiss and abruptly disconnected the video call, leaving Beatrice staring down at her blank dark phone screen in absolute stunned horror, as the profound silence in the room returned once again today. The silence was now vastly thicker and far more oppressive than before. Vernon suddenly surged violently up from the low sofa, fueled entirely by blind, completely terrified desperation. He rushed frantically across the wide room directly toward me, his face flushing dark red, his eyes wide and completely wild with absolute terror. He pointed a heavily trembling finger directly at my face. He loudly demanded that I open my leather tote bag and retrieve my tablet immediately. He aggressively commanded me to log back into the highly secure corporate server system and immediately reverse the entire strict immobilization protocol now. He frantically ordered me to remotely unlock the seized sports car doors, completely erase the active stolen vehicle report from the federal database, and let the furious buyer drive away freely without any police interference. He desperately promised he would magically figure out a creative way to replace the extremely rare vehicle later, swearing that he would gladly take out a massive second mortgage on the house, that he would completely empty his extensive retirement accounts today. He pathetically begged, he aggressively threatened, he desperately tried to leverage his fading position as my authoritative father to force my absolute compliance. He kept loudly insisting that I owed him my unwavering obedience simply because he raised me under his roof. I looked calmly at him, feeling absolutely nothing inside my chest. I flatly refused his insane demands. I firmly stood my ground and calmly stated that I was strictly legally and ethically bound by my unyielding fiduciary duty to my corporate client. I explained, speaking incredibly slowly as if addressing a highly stubborn, exceptionally slow child, that the stolen vehicle was absolutely not a cheap toy to be casually pawned off to cover his greedy son's ridiculous mounting financial debts today. If I bypassed the strict security protocols to willingly aid and abet a verified felony theft, I would be immediately terminated, permanently blacklisted from the global luxury asset management industry and sent directly to a federal prison for criminal conspiracy and wire fraud. I was absolutely not going to destroy my entire successful life, my spotless career, and my personal freedom to protect them from the devastating legal consequences of their own malicious, staggering greed. You made the sale, Dad, I stated coldly. You deal with the customer service. I opened the heavy door and finally walked completely out forever. I grasped the brass handle of the door, ready to leave this toxic environment. Before I could turn the knob, a deafening crash echoed from the other side. The heavy mahogany wood shuddered violently against its reinforced steel hinges. Someone was kicking the front door with massive force. Vernon let out a terrified yelp, stumbling backward over the expensive Persian rug, Beatrice shrieked, dropping her phone onto the cold marble floor with a sharp clatter. I stepped back calmly, pulling my suitcase out of the way. The heavy brass knocker rattled furiously against the wood. "Open the door, Vernon!" A deep voice bellowed from the front porch, the sound vibrating right through the solid wood. "Open it right now before I kick it completely off the hinges." My father stood absolutely paralyzed in the center of the foyer, his complexion rapidly turning a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. His chest heaved with sudden, overwhelming panic. I reached forward without hesitation, unlatched the heavy deadbolt, and swung the large double doors wide open. The oppressive Georgia heat instantly flooded the air-conditioned foyer, bringing with it the overpowering smell of thick diesel exhaust, stale cigarette smoke, and incredibly cheap cologne. Standing on the immaculate custom monogrammed welcome mat was the shady black market buyer. He was an absolute mountain of a man, easily standing over 6 feet 4 inches tall. He wore a tight black polo shirt that visibly strained over a heavily tattooed chest. Behind him, parked aggressively across my parents' perfectly manicured front lawn, was a heavily beat-up matte gray pickup truck. The oversized, mud-caked tires had carved deep trenches directly through Beatrice's prized rose bushes. Flanking the furious buyer were two incredibly large stone-faced associates. They wore dark sunglasses and stood with their thick arms crossed over their chests, radiating the kind of quiet professional violence that usually only existed in gritty crime movies. The buyer completely ignored my presence. He locked his furious, bloodshot gaze entirely on my violently trembling father. He stepped aggressively over the threshold, his scuffed work boots deliberately leaving dark, muddy smears across the pristine, hand-polished white marble tiles. The two enormous associates stepped up right behind him in perfect unison, effectively blocking the entire doorway and cutting off any potential route of escape. "You set me up, you arrogant fool!" the buyer snarled rapidly, advancing on Vernon until he was standing chest to chest with him. Vernon shrank back in terror, visibly cowering away from the immense physical threat looming right over him. "No, please, you have to listen to me," Vernon stammered weakly, desperately, holding his shaking hands up defensively. "It was just a minor clerical error. The DMV paperwork got delayed in the system. I swear to you, it is just a simple misunderstanding that we can easily fix right now." A simple clerical error. The buyer roared, his booming voice visibly shaking the expensive crystal chandelier hanging directly overhead. I am currently sitting dead in the middle of Interstate 85. The dashboard display is flashing a bright, blinding red warning, screaming that the asset is officially stolen and federal police have been automatically dispatched. The massive engine completely locked up on me at 70 miles an hour. The doors instantly deadlocked and trapped me inside a metal cage. I had to literally smash the driver's side window with a heavy steel tire iron just to crawl out onto the pavement before the state troopers inevitably arrived with their sirens blazing. I had to permanently abandon a $300,000 vehicle on the dirty shoulder of the highway and hitch a highly embarrassing ride in a noisy work truck just to get here. Beatrice let out a muffled, pathetic sob, pressing her perfectly manicured hands tightly against her trembling mouth. She desperately tried to quietly retreat toward the safety of the formal dining room, but one of the massive, silent associates shifted his significant weight, leveling a cold, dead stare that immediately pinned her right in place on the marble floor. "I want my cash back immediately!" The buyer stated, his voice suddenly dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "I want my $150,000 in crisp, unmarked bills right this very second, Vernon. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now." Vernon swallowed incredibly hard, thick beads of nervous sweat rapidly pouring down his panicked face. "I do not have the money right now. I wired it away already. I sent it directly to my son. He is currently on an international flight to the islands. The financial transaction is completely finalized. I cannot just call the bank and magically reverse an international wire transfer instantly. The money is entirely gone." The huge buyer smiled, but it was a cold, utterly predatory baring of teeth that contained absolutely no genuine amusement. He suddenly reached out with lightning speed and violently grabbed my father by the wide lapels of his incredibly expensive custom-tailored navy blazer, brutally twisting the fine Italian fabric tightly in his massive fists. Vernon let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp as he was hauled up onto his tiptoes. "I do not care about your stupid son," the buyer whispered menacingly, pulling Vernon so close that their noses were practically touching. "I do not care about your complicated international wire transfers. I only care about my money. You have until exactly midnight tonight. If you do not hand over my $150,000 in pure cash by the time the clock strikes 12, I am going to return here. And I am going to extract my money directly out of the equity of this beautiful, lavish house by extreme force. I will take the luxury cars, the expensive art hanging on the walls, the hidden jewelry, and absolutely anything else that shines. And if you even think about calling the local police for help, I promise you they will quickly find out exactly who illegally forged those DMV documents this morning. You will go down for federal wire fraud and grand theft right alongside me. Do we have a crystal clear understanding of this arrangement?" Vernon nodded frantically, pathetic tears of absolute terror brimming in his widened eyes. "Yes, yes, midnight. I understand completely. I will get it. I swear to you on my life. I will have the cash." The buyer released him roughly aggressively, shoving Vernon backwards so hard that he nearly tripped over his own feet. The massive man turned sharply, signaling his silent associates with a quick jerk of his heavy chin. They stepped back off the porch in perfect synchronization. The furious buyer looked over at me for the very first time, carefully noting my perfectly calm posture and my packed, rolling suitcase. He gave a brief, dismissive nod of grim acknowledgement, then casually walked back to his damaged truck. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle tore out of the driveway, kicking up massive chunks of green sod. The moment the truck disappeared, Vernon collapsed onto the floor, clutching his head in his shaking hands. Beatrice rushed to his side, weeping hysterically. The brutal reality of their dire situation had finally crushed their endless delusions of grandeur. They had exactly a few short hours to produce a staggering amount of liquid cash they simply did not have or face incredibly violent, unavoidable retribution from a dangerous man who clearly had absolutely nothing to lose. They both slowly turned their tear-stained heads and looked hopelessly up at me. "Kendra, please!" Beatrice begged, her voice incredibly raw and utterly desperate. She crawled across the floor, reaching out to grab my trousers. I stepped back, pulling away. "You have to help us. He is going to destroy our home. You can write a check tonight." Vernon looked up. "I will pay you back every cent. Just front the cash." I looked down at them. "Do you remember the summer I turned 23? I asked, my voice completely calm. I had a terrifying medical emergency. I was $500 short on rent for my apartment. Facing immediate eviction, I came here and begged you for a loan. Do you remember exactly what you told me, Mom?" Beatrice looked away in shame, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You told me to pray on it," I stated flatly. "You said financial struggle builds character. Dad told me to learn how the real world works. You asked me to leave because I was ruining your dinner party." I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. I learned a valuable lesson about investing. Never invest capital into a failing toxic asset. "You cannot do this," Vernon sobbed. "You should start praying on it," I said, turning my back on them forever. I pulled the heavy front door open and left them trembling in their foyer. I headed straight back to my high-security penthouse where Julian was waiting. Vernon forced a harsh, booming bark of laughter into the heavy air, desperately trying to reassemble his shattered composure. He slammed his crystal highball glass onto the expensive marble coaster with enough force to crack the ice cubes spinning inside. The amber liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine surface, but he did not seem to care. He puffed out his chest, attempting to inflate his authority to match the sheer physical size of the room. "Titan Entertainment Group," he mocked, waving a dismissive heavy hand in my direction. "You honestly think you can come into my house, disrespect me under my own roof, and intimidate me with some meaningless corporate jargon? I am a respected man in this city, Kendra. I sit on the board of the largest congregation in Buckhead. I know exactly how the real world works. You do not just snap your fingers and summon federal agents over a minor internal family misunderstanding. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored navy blazer, pulled out a thickly folded stack of official-looking documents, and tossed them carelessly onto the glass coffee table. The papers landed with a sharp, heavy slap that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I have the official transfer papers sitting right there, he gloated, pointing a thick, manicured finger at the documents. Signed, sealed, and legally processed. Do you think I am an idiot? I did not just stumble through this transaction blindly. I used Marcus down at the DMV. He is a loyal brother from our congregation. He pushed the paperwork through the system this very morning. As far as the great state of Georgia is concerned, that vehicle belongs to the buyer now. There is no corporate asset problem. There is no theft. You are simply throwing a tantrum because your little brother is finally getting the luxury treatment he so richly deserves, and you cannot handle the fact that you were not the one to provide it. I looked down at the forged documents resting on the glass table. I did not even need to lean closer or touch them to know exactly how catastrophically poorly executed they were. Marcus from the congregation, I repeated slowly, letting the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of his master plan wash over the room. You used a low-level, easily traceable DMV clerk to forge the transfer of a limited edition supercar, a vehicle that is not even registered in the state of Georgia, Dad. It is registered to a corporate holding company operating out of Delaware. The title is heavily encumbered by corporate liens and insurance mandates that require board-level authorization to transfer. I unzipped the front leather pocket of my travel tote and methodically pulled out my iPad Pro. The magnetic case snapped open loudly, the sound sharp in the suddenly quiet room. You see, Dad, when you deal with assets of this extreme caliber, the rules of your little suburban street hustle do not apply. This is not a used sedan you can just flip for quick cash to fund a tropical getaway. I unlocked the screen using my facial recognition and immediately launched the proprietary security application provided by Titan Entertainment Group's private security division. The interface glowed with a harsh clinical blue light. I turned the bright screen around and placed it gently on top of his forged transfer papers, effectively burying his fake reality under undeniable digital proof. On the screen, a highly detailed real-time satellite map of the greater Atlanta metropolitan area was displayed. A pulsating crimson dot was clearly visible, currently moving south at high speed on Interstate 85. That red dot is the McLaren, I explained, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any anger or panic. And that specific dot is currently broadcasting a Level 1 distress signal directly to a private security firm contracted by Titan. You really thought a $300,000 promotional vehicle was just sitting under a tarp in a driveway with absolutely no oversight. The very second that car was started without my required biometric authorization, the system logged a critical security breach. Vernon stared down at the screen. The arrogant smugness completely drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of dawning horror. He watched the little red dot inch its way down the digital highway, his eyes tracking its movement as if he were watching a bomb tick down to zero. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat seemed to have seized up. No words came out. Let me explain to you exactly what you sold today. I continued pacing slowly across the plush Persian rug, my heels clicking softly. That car is equipped with military-grade anti-theft protocols. It possesses redundant GPS trackers hidden deep inside the chassis where they cannot be manually disabled. It has audio recording fail-safes that trigger upon unauthorized entry, and a remote engine immobilization system designed to safely disable the vehicle during high-speed pursuits. It is not just a car. It is a highly monitored, heavily insured vault on wheels. The buyer you found did not purchase a vehicle. He purchased a very expensive, extremely loud tracking device that is currently transmitting his exact location speed and trajectory directly to a secure server in Washington. Beatrice, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally stood up. Her designer silk cardigan slipped off her shoulders and pooled on the white leather sofa, but she did not seem to notice. Her hands were shaking violently. "You are bluffing!" she screamed, her voice shrill, ragged, and desperate. "You are just trying to scare us because you are jealous. You have always been insanely jealous of Darius. You cannot stand the thought of him enjoying a beautiful, relaxing trip with his wife while you sit around obsessing over your soulless corporate job. You are making up all this tracking nonsense to ruin his blessing." "I am not bluffing, Mom," I said smoothly, stepping back toward the coffee table. I leaned over and tapped a specific brightly colored icon on the top right corner of the iPad screen. A stark red warning prompt immediately appeared, requesting secondary confirmation to activate the remote immobilization protocol. I am just doing my job, a job that requires me to protect my client's assets from thieves. I tapped the confirmation button. The iPad emitted a sharp, loud, piercing confirmation beep that echoed violently off the high ceilings of the formal living room. The sound was deafening, a digital gavel striking down on their delusions. A green checkmark flashed across the screen, confirming the command had been successfully transmitted and received by the vehicle's onboard computer. "I just locked the engine," I announced, picking up the iPad and sliding it smoothly back into my tote bag. "The vehicle will now safely decelerate, pull to the shoulder, and then completely shut down. The electronic doors will remain deadlocked from the inside until law enforcement arrives with the correct override code. And yes, before you even attempt to ask, I have already reported the asset as officially stolen to the federal authorities." Titan Entertainment Group operates across multiple state lines, which automatically makes this grand theft auto a federal matter entirely out of the jurisdiction of your local police buddies. Beatrice lunged forward, closing the distance between us in a frantic blur of motion. She grabbed my forearm with a vice-like bruising grip. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug painfully into my skin through the fabric of my blouse. "Cancel it!" she commanded, her eyes wide with a terrifying, unhinged mix of blinding rage and absolute panic. "Call them right now and tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them you gave us permission to move the car. You are not going to ruin your brother's trip over your petty, vindictive jealousy. You will pick up your phone. You will call those people and you will fix this instantly." "Kendra, do you hear me?" I looked down at her hand, violently gripping my arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers and then shifted my gaze directly into her frantic, pleading eyes. I let the silence stretch out thick and heavy until she finally realized that her physical intimidation, the very same tactic she had used to bully me when I was a teenager, meant absolutely nothing to the woman standing before her now. "Let go of me," I demanded, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that brokered no debate. Beatrice gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she slowly released her grip, taking a hesitant, unsteady step backward. She looked at her own hands as if she did not recognize them. "You are completely insane," Vernon stammered, running a shaking hand over his sweating forehead. His confident posture had completely collapsed. "We are your parents. We are highly respected elders in the church. We have an immaculate reputation to uphold in this community. If the police get involved in this, if this gets out to the congregation, it will ruin everything we have built. You are going to call that corporate office right this second and tell them you made a scheduling error. You will tell them the car is perfectly fine. We will figure out how to get the money back to the buyer later, but you must stop the police right now." They were still desperately trying to gaslight me, even with the undeniable concrete reality of federal charges literally staring them in the face. They fundamentally believed they could simply order me to bend the world to their will. They truly believed their authority as my parents, their status in their megachurch, superseded the law, the truth, and my own professional livelihood. "There is no canceling this, Dad," I replied, standing tall as I watched their entire fabricated world begin to brutally crumble around them. When a corporation like Titan files a stolen asset report for a vehicle worth more than most people's homes, it triggers an automated response grid. The local police, the State Highway Patrol, and the FBI's Interstate Theft Division are all notified simultaneously. The wheels are already turning rapidly, and absolutely nothing I say or do will stop them now. Beatrice began to aggressively hyperventilate, clutching her chest. "You are doing this on purpose. You planned this to destroy us. You deliberately parked that car here just to set a trap for your own family. How could you be so evil to your own flesh and blood? I parked it here because your driveway is securely gated and my building's garage is under construction, I said, shaking my head at her desperate, pathetic mental gymnastics. You chose to break into my secure lockbox. You chose to forge my signature on legal documents. You chose to involve a church member in a verifiable felony. You chose to sell a stolen vehicle to a black market fence. And you chose to send the illicit funds to Darius. I did not set a trap. You built one yourselves meticulously, piece by piece, and then you jumped right in. Vernon pointed a trembling, desperate finger toward the front door. Fix this, Kendra. If you do not fix this right now, you are dead to us. We will cut you out of this family forever. You will never set foot in this house again. The sheer audacity of his threat almost made me laugh out loud. They were holding a burning bridge over their heads and threatening to drop it on me. I calmly reached down and wrapped my hand securely around the leather handle of my rolling suitcase. I adjusted my designer blazer, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I looked down at my watch, noting the exact time their empire began to irreversibly collapse. Federal agents do not cancel investigations for church elders, Mom, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the thick, panicked air of the living room. And they certainly do not care about your luxury family vacations. Without waiting for another frantic command or delusional threat, I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy front door. My hand had barely touched the heavy brushed brass handle of the front door when a sharp, incredibly aggressive ringtone shattered the suffocating silence of the foyer. It was Vernon's personal cell phone vibrating violently against the thick glass coffee table where his forged documents lay scattered like useless trash. The caller identification flashed brightly on the screen in stark, angry letters. It read, T-Bone Auto Imports. Vernon stared at the glowing device as if it had suddenly burst into bright, consuming flames right there in his immaculate living room. He hesitated, his broad chest heaving with mounting panic. He snatched the phone up with a trembling hand, swiping the screen to answer and pressing it tightly against his ear. He did not even get a single chance to utter a greeting. Even from across the vast expanse of the tiled foyer, I could clearly hear the explosive, furious screaming bleeding out of the tiny earpiece. The voice on the other end was intensely rough, completely panicked, and heavily accented with raw street rage. Vernon's eyes widened to the size of dinner saucers as he listened to the man completely lose his mind over the failed criminal transaction. The shady buyer, the notorious Atlanta black market luxury car flipper who had foolishly believed he'd just scored the absolute deal of a lifetime, was currently hopelessly trapped. The angry buyer screamed into the phone that he was currently sitting dead in the middle of Interstate 85. He vividly described how the matte black McLaren had suddenly jerked violently, the massive engine whining in loud protest before completely seizing up at exactly 70 miles per hour. He had barely managed to wrestle the heavy, entirely unpowered machine onto the gravel shoulder before the digital dashboard turned a blinding crimson. The man shouted hysterically that the interior cabin was now completely deadlocked. The tinted windows would not roll down an inch, and the central display screen was flashing a massive, inescapable warning message. Stolen asset, federal authorities dispatched, remain in vehicle. The trapped buyer threatened Vernon with immediate severe physical violence. He furiously demanded his $150,000 back within the next hour, aggressively promising to send his armed associates directly to the Buckhead house to collect the cash forcefully if Vernon dared to play any stupid games with his money or his freedom right here today. Vernon desperately tried to stammer out a pathetic excuse, but the furious man abruptly hung up the call, leaving a loud dial tone that echoed hollowly in the cavernous living room. Vernon weakly dropped the expensive phone back onto the glass table. His large hands were shaking so severely he could barely clasp them together to steady himself. He looked over at me, his face entirely devoid of blood, completely stripped of his earlier towering arrogance. He was rapidly hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps as the crushing reality of his criminal actions finally crashed violently down now. Before Vernon could even attempt to form a single coherent sentence, Beatrice's phone chirped cheerfully from the depths of her designer purse. It was an incoming FaceTime request. The bright screen lit up with Tasha's name. Beatrice, desperate for any possible distraction from the impending legal disaster unfolding in her home, practically dove for the phone and quickly accepted the video call. She held the screen up high, and Tasha's face immediately filled the display, beaming with obnoxious, highly performative joy. Tasha was currently live streaming directly to her numerous social media followers from the Delta Fiv YP Lounge right now. She was broadcasting live from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. She held her phone high in the air, slowly panning around the exclusive room to show off the complimentary premium champagne and the plush leather seating areas. Right behind her, a massive mountain of brand-new, heavily logoed Louis Vuitton luggage sat stacked precariously on a brass luggage cart. Tasha flipped the camera lens back to herself, leaning in extremely close to the microphone. She loudly addressed her captive followers, her high-pitched voice dripping with toxic venom and completely artificial sweetness as she flaunted her stolen wealth online today. She endlessly gloated about her impromptu, fully funded luxury getaway to the pristine beaches of Bora Bora. She made a deliberate point to repeatedly and loudly thank her incredibly generous, wonderfully wealthy family members for finally recognizing her true worth and funding her mental health break. Then the inevitable, predictable attack came. Tasha looked directly into the camera lens and began ruthlessly mocking me by my first name. She openly called me a broke, hopelessly bitter auntie who spent her entire sad life serving extremely wealthy people instead of ever actually being rich or successful in her own absolute right. She laughed obnoxiously loudly, telling her gullible audience that maintaining fierce family loyalty always pays off in the end, unlike choosing a sad, incredibly lonely corporate career, managing other people's money. She proudly paraded her fresh, glittering manicure in front of the camera lens, aggressively bragging that experiencing real generational wealth meant never having to actually work for anyone else ever again. I stood silently in the grand foyer, my hand still resting lightly on the cold brass doorknob, quietly watching the entire pathetic, delusional display unfold on the small screen from across the large, lavishly decorated living space today. I remained completely unfazed by her petty insults. I truly felt no anger whatsoever toward Tasha, only a profound, deeply clinical pity for her supreme ignorance. She was gleefully dancing to loud music on the top deck of a rapidly sinking ship, completely oblivious to the massive jagged hole currently being ripped into the hull beneath her feet. Beatrice desperately tried to speak, to quickly warn her oblivious daughter to stop broadcasting their location and crimes immediately, but her dry voice completely failed her. Vernon had fully collapsed back onto the pristine white leather sofa cushions, looking completely destroyed now. He was tightly clutching his chest, his breathing incredibly loud and highly erratic as he helplessly watched his stolen money being brazenly flaunted on a public live broadcast. Tasha happily continued her incredibly smug monologue, entirely unaware that the very funds paying for her premium lounge champagne were currently the subject of an active federal grand theft auto investigation. Tasha finally ended the live stream with a blown kiss and abruptly disconnected the video call, leaving Beatrice staring down at her blank, dark phone screen in absolute stunned horror as the profound silence in the room returned once again today. The silence was now vastly thicker and far more oppressive than before. Vernon suddenly surged violently up from the low sofa, fueled entirely by blind, completely terrified desperation. He rushed frantically across the wide room directly toward me, his face flushing dark red, his eyes wide and completely wild with absolute terror. He pointed a heavily trembling finger directly at my face. He loudly demanded that I open my leather tote bag and retrieve my tablet immediately. He aggressively commanded me to log back into the highly secure corporate server system and immediately reverse the entire strict immobilization protocol now. He frantically ordered me to remotely unlock the seized sports car doors, completely erase the active stolen vehicle report from the federal database, and let the furious buyer drive away freely without any police interference. He desperately promised he would magically figure out a creative way to replace the extremely rare vehicle later, swearing that he would gladly take out a massive second mortgage on the house, that he would completely empty his extensive retirement accounts today. He pathetically begged, he aggressively threatened, he desperately tried to leverage his fading position as my authoritative father to force my absolute compliance. He kept loudly insisting that I owed him my unwavering obedience simply because he raised me under his roof. I looked calmly at him, feeling absolutely nothing inside my chest. I flatly refused his insane demands. I firmly stood my ground and calmly stated that I was strictly legally and ethically bound by my unyielding fiduciary duty to my corporate client. I explained, speaking incredibly slowly, as if addressing a highly stubborn, exceptionally slow child, that the stolen vehicle was absolutely not a cheap toy to be casually pawned off to cover his greedy son's ridiculous mounting financial debts today. If I bypassed the strict security protocols to willingly aid and abet a verified felony theft, I would be immediately terminated, permanently blacklisted from the global luxury asset management industry, and sent directly to a federal prison for criminal conspiracy and wire fraud. I was absolutely not going to destroy my entire successful life, my spotless career, and my personal freedom to protect them from the devastating legal consequences of their own malicious, staggering greed. "You made the sale, Dad," I stated coldly. "You deal with the customer service." I opened the heavy door and finally walked completely out forever. I stepped into the private elevator and swiped my encrypted access card, feeling the smooth, rapid ascent to my penthouse sanctuary. The heavy steel doors slid silently open to reveal my immaculate, climate-controlled living space. The ambient lighting was dialed down to a cool, calming slate blue. Julian was already waiting for me at the massive quartz kitchen island, his eyes completely glued to a glowing array of multiple high-resolution monitors. He had a steaming mug of artisanal dark roast coffee resting near his keyboard, and a sharp, deeply satisfied smile playing across his handsome face. He did not even look up from his glowing screens as I dropped my leather tote bag onto the suede entryway bench and kicked off my designer heels. He simply pointed a long finger at the largest central monitor. Julian was a former cybersecurity specialist for the federal government before Titan Entertainment Group recruited him for their private intelligence division. He had successfully mirrored Vernon's mobile device the moment they attempted to forge my digital signature at the DMV this morning. We now had a crystal-clear, real-time audio feed of every single panicked phone call my father was frantically making from that Buckhead mansion. On a secondary screen, Julian had already pulled up the live security camera feeds from the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport Delta VIP Lounge. Tasha had foolishly tagged her exact geographical location online multiple times, making it incredibly simple for Julian to track their precise movements. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and leaned casually against the cool quartz island, watching the magnificent, entirely self-inflicted destruction of my toxic family unfold in glorious high definition. On the audio feed, Vernon's breathing sounded like a dying asthmatic locomotive. The heavy, panicked gasps echoed loudly through the penthouse speakers. We could hear the frantic, slippery tapping of his thick fingers as he desperately dialed his golden boy. The phone rang twice before Darius finally answered. The background noise of the busy airport terminal immediately flooded the audio feed, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence of my parents' mansion. "Dad, I cannot really talk right now," Darius answered, his voice dripping with his usual entitled, arrogant laziness. "Tasha is trying to get the lounge attendant to open another bottle of the vintage reserve champagne, and the guy is giving her serious attitude. I need to go handle this before she causes a massive scene in front of the other first-class passengers." Vernon did not even acknowledge the champagne. He bypassed the casual greeting entirely, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek that I had never once heard from the man in my entire 35 years of life. "Darius, you have to wire the money back to my account this exact second," Vernon screamed into the phone, his raw vocal cords completely giving out. "You need to log into your banking app right now and reverse the entire transfer. I do not care about the vacation. I do not care about the flights. You have to send the $150,000 back to me immediately. There is a deeply dangerous man who is going to literally kill me and your mother if I do not have his cash in my hands by midnight tonight." There was a long, incredibly heavy pause on the other end of the line. The cheerful background chatter of the luxury airport lounge seemed to mock the absolute terror radiating from Vernon's panicked voice. When Darius finally spoke, the arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by a thin, shaky, deeply hesitant stammer. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Darius asked, his voice suddenly sounding like a terrified, confused child. "What do you mean reverse the transfer? You said the money was entirely clean. You swore the sports car transaction was totally legitimate and the cash was a guaranteed gift." "It does not matter what I said this morning," Vernon roared, the sheer desperation making him sound utterly unhinged. The buyer was a violent black market criminal. The corporate owners tracked the vehicle and remotely locked the engine on the interstate. The buyer had to abandon the car. He came to the house with armed associates. "They are going to violently strip the equity from this house and possibly hurt us if the money is not returned by midnight. You must cancel the vacation package and refund the cash instantly." Another pause followed. This one was far worse. It was the thick, suffocating silence of impending doom. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes locked on the airport security feed. I could clearly see Darius pacing nervously near the expansive lounge windows, his face draining of all color. He ran a shaking hand over his head, looking around the room with wild, darting eyes. "Dad, I cannot reverse the transfer," Darius whispered, his voice trembling so violently that the microphone barely picked up the sound. "What do you mean you cannot reverse it?" Vernon demanded, his panic escalating into pure, blinding rage. "Just call the travel agency. Tell them there is a family emergency. Pay whatever exorbitant cancellation fee they demand. I do not care if we lose $10,000 in penalties. Just get the remaining principal back to my account before these thugs murder us in our own foyer." "I did not use a travel agency." Darius confessed, the words spilling out of his mouth in a fast, terrified rush. "I did not book the trip through a normal company, Dad." Julian raised a single intrigued eyebrow, leaning forward in his ergonomic chair. He quickly began typing a complex string of commands into a secondary terminal, already tracing the digital footprint of the massive wire transfer Vernon had sent earlier that day. "What in the world are you talking about?" Vernon gasped, the breath completely knocked out of his lungs. "Where did you send the money, Darius?" "Tasha wanted the absolute best," Darius stammered, clearly bordering on a full-blown panic attack. "She wanted the presidential overwater villa at the Four Seasons. She wanted the private helicopter transfers and the exclusive VIP excursions. But even with the $150,000, the taxes and the resort fees were pushing us way over the budget. I wanted to impress her dad. I wanted to give her the ultimate luxury experience she kept demanding. So I found a guy online." "You found a guy online?" Vernon repeated, his voice dropping to a horrified, breathless whisper. "He was an exclusive luxury lifestyle concierge I met in a private invite-only Telegram group." Darius explained, his words tumbling over each other in a pathetic attempt to justify his catastrophic stupidity. "He had incredible reviews, Dad. He promised he could secure the entire luxury package for a massive 50% discount if I bypassed the standard banking system. He said the hotels offer deep, unadvertised discounts for clients who pay upfront using decentralized currency. It is a very common practice for high-net-worth individuals." Julian let out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. He tapped the enter key with a loud clack. "Found it," Julian announced calmly, pointing to the scrolling lines of code on his screen. The idiot transferred the entire sum into an unregulated cryptocurrency exchange and sent it directly to a completely anonymous digital wallet address operating out of an untraceable server in Eastern Europe. The funds were instantly dispersed across 40 different offshore accounts the second the transaction cleared. On the audio feed, Vernon let out a sound that was less human and more like a wounded animal. "You bought a luxury vacation using untraceable cryptocurrency from a random stranger on a messaging app." Vernon choked out, the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of his son finally breaking his mind. "He sent me the booking confirmations," Darius cried defensively, though his voice was entirely devoid of conviction. "He sent me official-looking PDF documents with the airline logos and the resort letterhead. He promised the digital tickets would be emailed directly to my inbox the moment we arrived at the airport lounge. But they never arrived, Dad. I have been frantically refreshing my email for the past 2 hours. His Telegram account is completely deleted. The phone number he gave me is permanently disconnected. The airline front desk just told me that our confirmation numbers do not even exist in their global system. You gave away $150,000 to a scammer, Vernon screamed, his voice tearing into a ragged, guttural howl. You lost the money that is supposed to save my life. You foolish, arrogant, completely useless boy. You have doomed us all. Suddenly, the audio feed erupted in chaotic, high-pitched screaming. Tasha had apparently grown tired of waiting for her vintage champagne and had marched over to confront Darius just in time to hear the devastating conclusion of the phone call. The security camera footage captured the exact moment her artificially constructed world imploded entirely. What do you mean the tickets are fake? Tasha shrieked, her voice easily, cutting through the ambient noise of the entire VIP lounge. Several wealthy travelers visibly flinched, turning their heads to witness the unfolding spectacle. What do you mean the money is gone, Darius? I just posted a live update to 40,000 followers telling them I was boarding a private flight to Bora Bora. Tasha, please calm down, Darius begged, holding his hands up defensively as he desperately tried to back away from her. We can figure this out. Just keep your voice down. We are in public. I will not keep my voice down! Tasha roared, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. You promised me an ultra-luxury vacation. You promised me generational wealth. You bragged about how rich and powerful your family was. You told me Kendra was just a jealous loser and that you were the true success story. And you gave our money to a random scammer on a messaging app. You absolute, pathetic failure. Tasha's violent meltdown escalated with terrifying speed. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy crystal water goblet resting on a side table, and hurled it directly at Darius. It narrowly missed his head, shattering violently against the thick glass windows of the lounge. The loud crash brought a sudden shocked silence to the entire room, followed instantly by the frantic shouting of airport security personnel. Tasha did not stop. She completely lost whatever tenuous grip she had on reality. She lunged toward the brass luggage cart holding her prized mountain of brand-new Louis Vuitton bags. With a primal scream of pure, absolute rage, she began violently hurling the expensive luggage across the pristine lounge. A heavy duffel bag slammed into a beautifully catered buffet table, sending expensive pastries and silver serving trays crashing to the floor in a chaotic mess. A rolling suitcase skidded violently across the polished tiles, taking out a delicate floral arrangement. You ruined my life! Tasha screamed repeatedly, hitting Darius in the chest with her clenched fists as he desperately tried to shield his face. You humiliated me! Everyone is going to laugh at me. You are completely broke. Your family is broke. You are nothing but a pathetic fraud. Two large uniformed airport security officers finally sprinted into the frame, forcefully grabbing Tasha by the arms and dragging her away from the cowering Darius. She fought them like a wildcat, her designer heels slipping on the spilled food, her perfectly styled hair flying in every direction. She continued screaming obscenities at Darius, calling him every derogatory name imaginable, as the officers wrestled her out of the VIP lounge in front of dozens of shocked recording onlookers. Multiple passengers already had their smartphones out, eagerly capturing the entire humiliating public meltdown in crisp, high-definition video. Darius was left standing alone in the center of the completely trashed lounge, surrounded by broken glass, crushed pastries, and scattered designer luggage. He looked absolutely pathetic, a thoroughly broken man, completely exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. He slowly lifted the phone back to his ear. Dad, Darius whimpered, tears freely streaming down his face as he watched his fiancée being hauled away by armed airport police. Dad, what are we going to do? But there was no answer. Vernon had completely dropped his phone. The audio feed transmitted nothing but the dial tone, followed by the terrifying sound of Beatrice aggressively hyperventilating in the background. I casually took a slow, refreshing sip of my sparkling water. I reached out and gently tapped the keyboard, permanently severing the audio connection to my father's phone. The penthouse returned to its peaceful, calming silence. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a highly amused smile. I turned away from the glowing monitors, feeling absolutely no remorse, no guilt, and no sadness. They had carefully dug their own deep graves, and I simply watched them willingly jump inside. However, the tranquil serenity of my private sanctuary did not last long. Less than 45 minutes after the catastrophic meltdown in the airport lounge, the secure communication intercom mounted, flush against the pristine white kitchen wall, emitted a sharp, urgent, and highly aggressive buzzing tone. The sudden noise shattered the calm atmosphere. Julian gracefully slid his specialized communication headset off his ears, his dark eyes immediately locking onto the rapidly blinking crimson light of the security panel. He reached out with a calm, steady hand and tapped the sleek receiver button. The lobby concierge sounded remarkably strained. His usually flawless, highly polished professional composure was visibly cracking under severe, unexpected pressure. He quickly reported that my parents were currently standing in the center of the immaculate imported marble lobby, causing a massive, highly embarrassing public disturbance. They were aggressively demanding immediate, unrestricted access to the penthouse level. They were loudly screaming about life-or-death family emergencies, frantically disturbing the other wealthy residents, and aggressively threatening to call the local police department if they were denied immediate entry to my private residence. Julian did not even look over at me to ask for my permission to handle the escalating situation. He simply instructed the flustered concierge to grant them access to the private elevator and send them directly up to our secure floor. His voice projected nothing but absolute chilling calm, completely devoid of any anxiety or hesitation. He stood up slowly from his ergonomic chair, methodically smoothing out the invisible wrinkles from his tailored dark gray slacks. He walked with deliberate, predatory precision over to the heavy mahogany credenza positioned near the expansive entryway. He reached down and picked up a thick, sleek black leather legal binder. The gold-embossed logo of Titan Entertainment Group gleamed softly and dangerously under the ambient, recessed ceiling lighting. I remained perfectly seated at the quartz island, calmly watching his flawless preparation. I felt absolutely no fear, only a deeply clinical curiosity about exactly how far their blinding, desperate hubris would push them. The private high-speed elevator hummed softly as it rapidly ascended the exterior of the luxury high-rise building. When the heavy reinforced steel doors finally slid open, with a soft melodic chime, Vernon and Beatrice practically spilled out onto the polished hardwood floors of my private foyer. They looked entirely unrecognizable. The pristine, highly cultivated country club image they so desperately maintained had been thoroughly, brutally destroyed. Vernon was sweating profusely, thick beads of moisture pouring down his rapidly reddening forehead. His expensive, custom-tailored navy blazer was deeply wrinkled and visibly stained with dark sweat patches. His silk tie was pulled loose, hanging haphazardly around his thick, heavily heaving neck. He was gasping for air, his chest rising and falling with frantic, ragged breaths. Beatrice was in an even worse, completely pathetic state. Her perfectly styled, chemically treated hair was wildly disheveled, clinging in damp strands to her face. Her expensive designer makeup was entirely smeared from crying, leaving dark, jagged streaks of mascara running down her flushed cheeks. Her luxury silk cardigan hung awkwardly off one shoulder, completely forgotten in her absolute blind panic. The sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from them was a palpable force rapidly filling the cool, climate-controlled air of my home with the foul, metallic stench of total desperation. "Kendra, you have to fix this instantly," Vernon bellowed aggressively, stomping his heavy dress shoes across the foyer. His heavy fists were tightly clenched at his sides, his knuckles turning pure white. He did not even bother to acknowledge Julian standing quietly, almost invisibly near the entryway. "You work with complex computer systems all day long. You clearly know exactly how these digital financial things operate. You are going to log into your corporate terminal right now, track down that exact foreign hacker on the internet, and manually reverse the entire cryptocurrency transfer. You must get Darius his money back before midnight, or we are all literally going to die today." Beatrice aggressively lunged forward, closing the distance between us. Her eyes were impossibly wide, wild with an absolute consuming panic that bordered on total insanity. If you cannot reverse the digital transfer, you must write us a personal check right this exact second, she demanded, her voice shrill, wavering, and aggressively commanding. We need $150,000 in pure liquid cash immediately. You owe this family, Kendra. We raised you under our roof. We fed you for 18 years. We gave you absolutely everything you have. You clearly have millions sitting in your untouchable corporate accounts. You will transfer the funds to your father immediately to pay off those violent, dangerous thugs before they arrive at our home. Their sheer, unwavering delusion was truly breathtaking to behold. Even now, facing imminent financial ruin, complete public humiliation, and extremely violent criminal retribution, they fundamentally believed they possessed the ultimate, unquestionable authority to storm aggressively into my private home and violently command me to empty my personal bank accounts for their immediate salvation. They still viewed me not as a successful independent adult, but merely as a convenient disposable resource to be unethically drained whenever their precious golden child inevitably failed them. I did not say a single word in response to their frantic, screaming demands. I did not blink. I simply looked calmly over at Julian. Julian stepped smoothly and silently into their path, completely and effectively blocking their frantic, aggressive advance toward the kitchen island. He did not raise his voice. He did not show a single solitary ounce of human emotion. He moved with the terrifying, highly calculated precision of a specialized predator, effortlessly cornering its weak, panicked prey. He held the sleek black leather binder loosely in his right hand, casually tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," Julian said, his voice instantly dropping the ambient temperature in the entire room by 10 degrees. "My name is Julian Hayes. I am the Senior Director of Private Intelligence and Corporate Security for Titan Entertainment Group. You are currently trespassing on highly secure private property, but since you took the time to drive all the way here in your current state, I have some official paperwork to deliver to you personally." Vernon stopped dead in his tracks. His heavy momentum completely vanished as his bloodshot, terrified eyes darted frantically between Julian's cold, emotionless face and the thick black binder. "What is this absolute nonsense?" Vernon stammered, desperately trying and completely failing to puff out his chest and project authority. "I am speaking directly to my daughter. Step aside immediately before I make you step aside." Julian did not move a single millimeter. He deliberately opened the sleek leather binder, pulling out a thick, heavy stack of crisp, legally binding documents printed on premium cardstock. He held them directly out, forcing Vernon to either take them or let them drop humiliatingly to the floor. Vernon instinctively, almost involuntarily, grabbed the thick papers. His large hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold them steady as he stared down at the bold, highly intimidating legal headers. "You have just been officially served with a comprehensive, legally binding cease and desist order." Julian stated, his tone perfectly flat and utterly devoid of any human empathy or hesitation. "You are hereby legally forbidden from contacting Kendra, approaching this residence, attempting to communicate with anyone affiliated with Titan Entertainment Group, or interfering with any corporate assets. But that is merely the beginning of your current, rapidly escalating problems today." Beatrice loudly gasped, forcefully covering her trembling mouth with her shaking hands. Her eyes darted wildly across the thick stack of legal documents. "The documents you are currently holding also contain a formal notice of impending litigation." Julian continued, taking a single measured step forward and forcefully causing Vernon to take a clumsy, unbalanced step backward. "Titan Entertainment Group is officially filing severe federal charges against both of you alongside your son Darius for grand larceny, massive wire fraud, criminal conspiracy to commit theft, and the highly illegal, unauthorized sale of stolen corporate assets across state lines. The forged Department of Motor Vehicles documents you illegally processed this morning have already been officially handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for complete prosecution." Vernon looked exactly like he was going to violently vomit all over the pristine hardwood floors. His jaw slackened, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. His terrified eyes rapidly scanned the terrifying legal jargon that meticulously, ruthlessly detailed his absolute, inescapable ruin. "You cannot do this." He finally choked out, his voice cracking pitifully into a high, pathetic whine. "We are family. This is a private, internal family matter. We can resolve this quietly among ourselves." Selling a $300,000 corporate vehicle to a known heavily armed black market criminal is absolutely not a family matter, Julian corrected coldly, his voice slicing through Vernon's pathetic excuses like a sharpened steel blade. "It is a severe, highly punishable federal crime. Titan possesses total, undeniable, and overwhelming proof of your illegal actions. We have the forged signatures documented. We have the digital tracking logs and the biometric access failures from the vehicle. We have the pristine audio recordings of your frantic, incriminating phone calls to the illegal buyer and your son. We have fully documented the entire, highly illegal cryptocurrency transaction. You face a mandatory minimum of 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for this specific level of organized corporate fraud." Beatrice completely broke down. The remaining fragile fragments of her deeply arrogant self-righteous facade shattered into absolute dust. She literally fell to her knees on the polished hardwood floor, her expensive designer dress pooling awkwardly and pathetically around her trembling legs. She began to weep hysterically, loudly sobbing as she clasped her shaking hands together in a deeply desperate, highly performative posture of prayer. She looked up at Julian, her tear-stained face contorted in a pathetic, agonizing mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "Please," she sobbed loudly, her shrill, ragged voice echoing violently off the high vaulted ceilings. "You must show us mercy! We are good God-fearing people. We are highly respected elders in our church. We lead the entire congregation. We consistently donate our time to charity. We have spent our entire lives serving the Lord and building a perfectly righteous reputation in this city. You absolutely cannot send us to federal prison. You must find it in your forgiving heart to overlook this transgression. The Lord strictly commands us to show grace to those who stumble. We were simply trying to help our poor, struggling son." She reached out blindly, frantically attempting to grab Julian by the hem of his dark trousers, desperately trying to use her supposed church elder status to emotionally manipulate and heavily shame him into compliance. Julian smoothly and effortlessly stepped back, easily avoiding her grasping, frantic hands. He looked down at her kneeling, pathetic figure with an expression of profound, chilling, absolute disgust. "Mercy." Julian repeated the word, sounding like a sharp, highly offensive curse on his lips. "Grace. That is a highly fascinating, deeply hypocritical perspective coming from you, Beatrice. Because according to the extensive, highly detailed background check I meticulously ran on your family dynamics earlier today, you seem to have a rather selective, entirely self-serving understanding of biblical grace." Julian closed the heavy black binder with a sharp, resounding snap that echoed like a gunshot in the foyer, making both Vernon and Beatrice violently flinch. In fact, Julian continued, leaning down slightly to look directly, unyieldingly, into Beatrice's weeping, terrified eyes. "I carefully listened to several of your publicly broadcasted sermons from your massive megachurch. Last month, you proudly delivered a passionate, highly aggressive 20-minute speech focusing entirely on strict personal accountability. Do you happen to remember the exact punishing words you used, Beatrice? You stood at the pulpit looking down at your congregation and proudly declared that the wicked must inevitably suffer the righteous, inescapable consequences of their deliberate, calculated sins. You loudly, fiercely preached that there are absolutely no shortcuts to salvation, and that hiding behind false righteousness is the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal of faith." Julian stared down at her utterly horrified, completely devastated face, letting her own deeply hypocritical, judgmental words crush the last remaining ounce of her inflated ego. "You should start praying on it. Start," Julian whispered coldly, perfectly echoing my own final words to them. Then, without another single word, Julian firmly grabbed the heavy brass handle and forcefully closed the thick, heavy oak door right in their miserable, weeping faces, sealing them permanently outside in the hallway to face the absolute devastation of their own criminal creation. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a sickening thud vibrating the floorboards beneath Vernon and Beatrice. They stood frozen in the pristine hallway, staring at the polished wood as if it might magically reopen. It did not. The absolute finality of Julian closing that door severed their last lifeline. Beatrice let out a muffled whimper, her hands shaking violently. They were completely out of options. The federal government was actively hunting them. A highly dangerous black market buyer had given them a midnight deadline to return $150,000 they simply did not possess. Vernon grabbed Beatrice's elbow, his grip bruising. They fled the luxury high-rise like terrified criminals, constantly looking over their shoulders. The drive back to Buckhead was conducted in complete suffocating silence. Vernon gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing through every desperate escape route. Nothing worked. The reality of federal prison loomed over them, an inescapable nightmare. When they finally pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of their lavish estate, the grand house felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. They rushed inside, locking the heavy deadbolts behind them. They jumped at every shadow, their former arrogance completely gone. Less than an hour later, the front door rattled violently. Vernon jumped, grabbing a heavy brass fireplace poker. The door swung open to reveal Darius. He looked entirely broken. His designer clothing was rumpled and stained from his chaotic, humiliating exit from the airport lounge. He dragged a single carry-on bag behind him. The rest of his expensive Louis Vuitton luggage was gone. Tasha was gone. She had officially called off the wedding, taken a separate car back to her parents' estate, and absolutely forbidden him from ever contacting her again. Darius collapsed onto the white leather sofa. He was entirely broke, publicly humiliated, and facing federal conspiracy charges. The silence in the living room stretched out. The antique grandfather clock ticked loudly, a brutal reminder of their rapidly approaching midnight deadline. They had exactly 4 hours left to produce the cash or face violent retribution. Vernon paced the length of the expensive Persian rug. He refused to lose everything. He refused to wear a federal prison uniform. "This is all her fault," Vernon suddenly hissed, his voice toxic. He turned to face his son. "Kendra orchestrated this entire disaster. She set us up. She manipulated that corporate car system to trap us. She humiliated us intentionally. She owes us for ruining this family. She is going to pay for this disrespect." Darius looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "How, Dad? She locked us out. Julian served you with a federal cease and desist. We cannot even go near her building without getting arrested. They have all the money and power. We have absolutely nothing left." Vernon smiled. It was the cold expression that completely transformed his face from a respected church elder into a desperate criminal. "We do not need her permission," Vernon whispered. "We do not need to ask her for anything ever again. We just need to take what is rightfully ours." Do you remember when Kendra first started dating Julian? She bragged about his lucrative background in private security and his expensive hobbies. She told us about his massive vintage watch collection. Darius frowned. "Watches? What do watches have to do with saving our lives right now?" "Everything," Vernon snapped, stepping closer to his son. "Julian collects rare vintage Patek Philippe timepieces. He keeps them displayed in a climate-controlled winder case right in his primary dressing room. Kendra told your mother the collection is easily worth over $200,000 on the open market. Vintage luxury watches are completely untraceable liquid assets." Beatrice gasped, finally looking up. "Vernon, you cannot seriously be suggesting we rob our own daughter." "We are not robbing anyone," Beatrice, Vernon barked, shutting down her weak protest. "We are actively collecting an overdue debt. Kendra maliciously ruined our lives today. She completely destroyed her brother's future. She owes us compensation for this immense suffering. We will simply take 2 watches from his closet, sell them quietly to a discreet pawnbroker. I know downtown, pay off the black market buyer tonight, and use the rest to secure top-tier defense attorneys. It is a flawless plan. They owe us this money. It is the righteous thing to do. Darius slowly sat up straighter, sheer desperation overriding his fragile conscience. A $200,000 collection. Darius repeated, his voice gaining a greedy strength. If we take all of them, we can pay off the buyer, hire the lawyers, and still have enough cash left over to start fresh somewhere else. We can completely escape this disaster. Vernon nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We take what we are owed, we solve our immediate crisis, and we punish Kendra for her blatant disrespect. It is perfectly poetic justice. But how do we get inside? Darius asked, practical logistics piercing his delusional greed. The building has heavy security. The elevators require encrypted keycards. Julian just threw you out. They will be watching for us. Vernon chuckled, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his sleek leather wallet. He methodically flipped through the numerous credit cards until he found a plain, unbranded white plastic card hidden in the back slot. 3 years ago, when Kendra first moved into that overly expensive penthouse, she gave your mother a spare emergency access card. Vernon explained, his voice dripping with malice. She explicitly told us it was only for genuine life or death emergencies. When she demanded it back after our argument last Thanksgiving, your mother handed over the original. But I am a highly cautious man, Darius. I took the card to a specialized locksmith downtown and paid him handsomely to quietly clone the encrypted magnetic strip. I have kept this copy hidden in my wallet ever since, waiting for a rainy day. Darius stared at the white plastic card, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. You cloned her security card. That is brilliant, Dad. That card bypasses the main lobby completely. It grants direct access from the subterranean residential parking garage straight up to the penthouse floor. We can walk right in, grab the watches, and be gone before anyone even notices we were there. But we need to ensure they are not home. Beatrice interjected, her moral outrage entirely replaced by desperate pragmatism. If Julian catches you inside his home, he will kill you both. He is a security expert. Vernon nodded, turning his attention to his phone. We monitor their movements. Kendra is incredibly predictable. She always posts her schedule online to brag to her corporate friends. He quickly opened his social media application and navigated directly to Kendra's profile. For 20 agonizing minutes, the three of them sat in the living room staring at the phone, waiting for a sign. Finally, the screen refreshed and a new story update appeared at the top of the feed. Vernon eagerly tapped the glowing circle. The video loaded instantly. It showed Kendra and Julian dressed in immaculate formal evening wear, standing in front of a massive, brightly lit step and repeat banner. The caption read, Annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Grateful to support such an amazing cause tonight. The location tag clearly placed them across the city. They are at a charity gala. Vernon announced, his voice vibrating with victorious excitement. Formal dinners like this always take at least 3 hours. They are completely occupied. The penthouse is entirely empty. We have a completely clear, unobstructed window to execute the extraction. Darius jumped up from the sofa, his previous exhaustion replaced by a massive rush of adrenaline. He grabbed a dark baseball cap from the entryway table and pulled it low over his eyes. Let us go right now, Dad. We get in, we secure the asset, and we save our lives. We take back exactly what we deserve. Vernon grabbed his car keys, his face set in a grim mask of sheer delusion. He turned to Beatrice, pointing a strict finger at her. Stay here, lock the doors. Do not answer the phone for anyone except me. We will be back within the hour with the solution to all our problems. Vernon and Darius hurried out to Vernon's remaining luxury SUV. They climbed inside, the heavy doors shutting with a solid, echoing thud. Vernon turned the ignition, the powerful engine roaring to life. They peeled out of the circular driveway, accelerating aggressively down the quiet suburban road. They drove through the darkening Atlanta streets, the neon city lights reflecting off the wet windshield. Their minds were completely consumed by their desperate, deeply flawed plan. They ignored every single speed limit, driven by blinding greed and mounting panic. They were driving directly toward a high-security fortress owned by a federal intelligence expert, armed only with a cloned keycard and staggering hubris. They honestly believed they were executing a brilliant, flawless heist. They had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into total devastation today. The subterranean parking garage beneath the luxury high-rise was a cavernous expanse of polished concrete and aggressive fluorescent lighting. Vernon navigated his heavy SUV into a shadowed visitor spot, killing the engine with a sharp twist of his wrist. He looked over at Darius, whose eyes were wide with a toxic mixture of paralyzing fear and desperate greed. Vernon pulled the cloned white keycard from his breast pocket, holding it up like a golden ticket to their salvation. They slipped out of the vehicle, moving quickly and quietly toward the private residential elevator banks reserved for penthouse owners. Vernon approached the sleek digital keypad mounted beside the reinforced steel elevator doors. His hand trembled slightly as he swiped the cloned card through the magnetic reader. A tense second passed before a soft green light illuminated the panel, accompanied by a welcoming melodic chime. The heavy doors slid open smoothly. Vernon smirked at his son, his chest puffing out with unwarranted pride. They stepped into the mahogany-paneled cab, and Vernon pressed the highest button on the control panel. The elevator immediately shot upward, carrying them rapidly toward Julian and Kendra's private sanctuary and their ultimate financial rescue today. The rapid ascent made Darius swallow hard, his hands gripping the empty canvas duffel bag he had brought to carry their stolen loot. The elevator smoothly decelerated, and the doors opened directly into Kendra's immaculate foyer. Vernon stepped out first, his heavy shoes sinking into the plush custom runner rug. The penthouse was shrouded in deep ambient shadow, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city skyline pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The absolute silence of the expansive residence confirmed their suspicions. Their perfect plan was working flawlessly. The apartment was completely and utterly empty today. Vernon motioned for Darius to follow him closely. They crept past the sprawling quartz kitchen island and moved swiftly down the wide hallway leading toward the master suite. Vernon possessed a rudimentary layout of the penthouse from Kendra's early boasting, and he navigated the darkened corridors with greedy determination. They pushed open the heavy double doors of the primary bedroom and bypassed the sleeping area, heading straight for Julian's expansive walk-in dressing room. Vernon flicked on a small pocket flashlight, cutting a sharp beam through the darkness. The beam swept across rows of immaculate tailored suits and shoes today. "There it is," Vernon whispered fiercely, the beam illuminating a massive custom-built glass and mahogany display cabinet bolted securely to the far wall. Behind the reinforced glass panels sat a dozen velvet-lined watch windows, slowly rotating their precious cargo. The vintage Patek Philippe timepieces gleamed softly under the flashlight beam. Vernon stepped closer, examining the cabinet lock. Instead of a complex biometric scanner, it was secured by a simple, old-fashioned brass keyhole. Julian clearly believed the building exterior security was sufficient. Vernon pulled a small tension wrench from his pocket and inserted it into the lock today. It took Vernon less than 20 seconds to force the simple lock mechanism. The glass door clicked open, exposing a fortune in rare horology. Darius pushed forward, unzipping the canvas duffel bag with frantic haste. "Grab everything," Vernon commanded, his voice thick with intoxicating triumph. They began snatching the heavy gold and platinum watches from their velvet mounts, tossing them carelessly into the dark bag. Each heavy thud represented thousands of dollars in untraceable liquid assets. They were no longer ruined men facing federal prison. They were victorious conquerors reclaiming their rightful family wealth from a highly disrespectful daughter today. "We did it!" Darius breathed heavily, clutching the bulging duffel bag to his chest like a newborn child. "We actually did it." Vernon grinned, snapping the glass cabinet shut. "I told you, son. They are arrogant, but we are smarter. Now let us get out of here before they finish their little charity dinner." They turned and sprinted back through the master bedroom, their hearts pounding with the massive adrenaline rush of a successful heist. They raced down the long hallway, heading straight for the private elevator doors in the foyer. They were mere seconds away from absolute freedom today. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere of the penthouse violently shifted. A harsh mechanical grinding noise echoed from the perimeter of the sprawling living room. Vernon and Darius froze in terror as heavy, impenetrable steel security shutters began slamming down over the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The beautiful view of the Atlanta skyline was instantly replaced by solid, unyielding metal armor. Before they could even process the descending shutters, the primary front door and the private elevator access doors locked simultaneously. A deafening, heavy magnetic clang reverberated through the floorboards, physically sealing them inside an impenetrable high-tech steel vault today. "What is happening?" Darius screamed, spinning around in pure panic as the final security shutter locked into place with a terrifying thud. Before Vernon could answer, the entire penthouse erupted in blinding retina-searing illumination. Hundreds of concealed LED tactical lights flared to life simultaneously, eliminating every shadow in the massive residence. Vernon shielded his eyes, stumbling backward against the hallway wall. The sudden, overwhelming brightness was completely disorienting. The soft, luxurious home had instantly transformed into a sterile, terrifying interrogation room. They were trapped like rats in an inescapable maze, holding a bag full of stolen luxury watches today. A sharp electronic chirp echoed from the living room. Vernon and Darius stumbled forward, squinting through the blinding glare. The massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the marble fireplace had flickered to life. The screen did not display a movie or a blank input screen. It displayed a crystal-clear, high-definition live video feed. Vernon felt his stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. Kendra and Julian were sitting side by side at a stark metal table. They were not wearing formal evening wear. They were not sipping champagne at a prestigious children's hospital charity gala today. They were casually dressed in dark jeans and sweaters, sitting inside the brightly lit, unmistakable interior of an Atlanta Police Department precinct. Standing directly behind their seated figures was a highly decorated precinct captain, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the live feed from the penthouse with an expression of absolute grim authority. Several uniformed officers moved efficiently in the background of the video feed. The charity gala post had been a meticulously crafted, perfectly timed digital illusion. It was a calculated piece of bait designed specifically to lure their blinding hubris straight into an inescapable legal trap today. Kendra leaned forward, looking directly into the camera lens. Her face projected a chilling, absolute calm that terrified Vernon more than the police captain standing behind her. "Smile for the feds, Dad," Kendra commanded smoothly, her voice echoing perfectly through the penthouse surround sound system. "You are currently trespassing in a highly secure residential fortress. You have bypassed encrypted security protocols, which constitutes felony breaking and entering, and you are holding a bag containing $250,000 in stolen assets, which constitutes felony grand larceny. The federal authorities have been watching your entire criminal performance live today." Vernon dropped his flashlight. It rolled across the floor, coming to a rest against the baseboard. Darius dropped the duffel bag. The heavy watches hit the hardwood floor with a dull, sickening thud. The realization of their absolute doom crashed over them like a concrete wave. They had not outsmarted anyone. They had walked blindly and willingly into a perfectly orchestrated digital ambush. The front door of the penthouse suddenly exploded inward. A tactical breach unit of the Atlanta Police Department flooded into the foyer. Heavily armored officers swarmed the living room, their tactical flashlights cutting through the glare today. "Get on the ground!" a commanding voice roared. "Show me your hands right now!" Vernon and Darius collapsed to their knees, instantly pressing their faces against the cold hardwood flooring. Rough hands grabbed their arms, twisting them painfully behind their backs. The cold, heavy steel of police handcuffs ratcheted tightly around their wrists, biting into their skin. They were hauled roughly to their feet, their rights being loudly read to them as they were dragged toward the breached front door. Down on the street level, the chaotic scene was unfolding under the flashing bright red and blue police sirens today. Tasha was standing on the wet pavement, holding her phone high, desperately trying to live-stream the raid to her dwindling social media followers. "My ex-fiancé is being unjustly targeted by a corrupt corporate system," she yelled into her phone camera, frantically trying to spin a false sympathetic narrative to salvage her completely ruined reputation. We demand absolute justice for Darius Wilson today. A stern police officer stepped into her frame, blocking the lens with a heavy hand. Ma'am, step back immediately and cease broadcasting, he ordered sharply, completely silencing her pathetic, desperate performance on the chaotic dark street today. The stern police officer blocked the camera lens with a heavy, unyielding hand, completely shutting down Tasha and her pathetic, desperate broadcast on the chaotic dark street. She stumbled backward, her designer heels scraping against the wet pavement, clutching her phone tightly against her chest, as the flashing police sirens painted her shocked face in harsh, alternating strokes of red and blue light. She watched in absolute humiliated silence as Vernon and Darius were violently shoved into the back of separate heavily armored police cruisers. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a terrifying definitive finality, sealing their immediate fate. The convoy of police vehicles sped away from the luxury high-rise, leaving Tasha completely alone on the cold street. Her grand illusion of marrying into untouchable wealth and securing a lifetime of effortless luxury had evaporated into thin air. Inside the freezing, sterile holding cells of the Atlanta Police Department, Vernon and Darius faced the brutal, undeniable reality of their catastrophic actions. The ink on their fingers from fingerprinting the harsh glare of the mugshot camera, and the deeply humiliating strip searches completely stripped away their remaining arrogance. They were processed not as wealthy elites, but as common felons. Beatrice spent the entire agonizing night frantically pacing the hardwood floors of her empty mansion, aggressively calling high-priced defense attorneys who demanded exorbitant, impossible upfront retainer fees. By early morning, she made a devastating, irreversible choice. She completely drained her entire life savings and completely liquidated her untouchable retirement fund. She handed over every single remaining penny she possessed, absorbing massive tax penalties, just to secure their temporary release through a shady downtown bail bondsman. When Vernon and Darius walked out of the bleak precinct 24 hours later, they looked haggard, pale, and utterly defeated. However, instead of showing genuine remorse or acknowledging the horrific severity of their federal crimes, a toxic, blinding denial instantly took root in their minds. Vernon absolutely refused to admit defeat. He immediately declared that they would simply pretend nothing had happened. They were respected pillars of the Buckhead community, and they absolutely refused to hide in shame like guilty criminals. They decided to brazenly attend the Buckhead Megachurch annual charity gala that upcoming weekend, violently clinging to the shattered remains of their social status. While Vernon and Beatrice meticulously ironed their formal wear and practiced their fake righteous smiles in the mirror, Tasha launched a vicious, highly coordinated counterattack online. Desperate to salvage her own ruined reputation and capitalize on the unfolding drama for engagement, she went on an absolute social media rampage. She posted a rapid series of highly edited, tearful videos to her massive follower base. Sitting on her plush bedroom floor, intentionally wearing no makeup to appear fragile and vulnerable, she sobbed directly into the camera lens. She viciously claimed that Kendra was a cruel, deeply jealous woman who had deliberately framed her own parents and brother out of pure greed and corporate malice. Tasha spun a completely fabricated, highly emotional narrative painting Darius as an innocent, hardworking victim of a ruthless corporate trap set by a cold, unfeeling sister. She loudly told her followers that Kendra was hoarding millions while actively trying to destroy her own flesh and blood just to boost her corporate ego. The videos went viral almost instantly. The comment sections flooded with absolute outrage directed entirely at Kendra. This toxic digital campaign quickly bled into reality, heavily infecting the local community. The congregation of the Buckhead megachurch, already primed to respect their wealthy elders, completely swallowed the lies without a single shred of evidence. The church members started murmuring, rapidly taking sides. They eagerly sided with the supposedly devout, long-suffering parents over the cold corporate daughter who had seemingly betrayed her own family. The gossip spread like a wildfire through the pews and weekly prayer groups. Kendra was actively painted as an arrogant, soulless executive who had maliciously orchestrated an illegal sting operation simply to humiliate her righteous, God-fearing parents. The congregants rallied behind Vernon and Beatrice, offering their blind, unwavering support. They fundamentally believed the false narrative that the devil was actively using Kendra to tear down a righteous, holy family. The night of the massive charity gala arrived, bringing with it a thick, suffocating atmosphere of performative righteousness. The Buckhead megachurch had rented out the most expensive, highly exclusive ballroom in downtown Atlanta. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of round tables draped in heavy white silk. Towering floral centerpieces of white roses and orchids dominated the room, perfuming the air with a cloying sweetness. The wealthiest, most influential members of the congregation were in attendance, dressed in their finest designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos. When Vernon, Beatrice, and Darius made their grand entrance, the room fell momentarily silent. The heavy wooden double doors swung open, and they stepped inside, projecting an aura of completely unbothered, absolute confidence. Vernon wore a pristine, impeccably tailored black tuxedo with a crisp white bow tie. Beatrice was draped in an emerald green silk gown, her diamond jewelry sparkling brightly under the ambient lights. Darius stood slightly behind them, wearing a sharp, dark suit and a carefully practiced expression of quiet, dignified suffering. Instead of shunning them, the crowd immediately swarmed them. Church members rushed forward to shake Vernon's hand and offer Beatrice sympathetic, comforting hugs. They were treated like returning war heroes who had just miraculously survived a brutal, unjust persecution. The sheer blinding hypocrisy of the entire scene was staggering. These people, who claimed to uphold the highest moral standards, were actively celebrating accused felons simply because they successfully maintained a wealthy, righteous facade. Vernon soaked up the attention, his bruised ego rapidly inflating with every sympathetic pat on the back. He felt completely invincible again, utterly convinced that his powerful social standing would protect him from any legal consequences. He believed he had successfully outsmarted Kendra's trap by simply refusing to acknowledge its existence. As the elaborate multi-course dinner concluded, the massive room quieted down for the keynote address. Vernon, as a senior church elder and a primary sponsor of the event, was scheduled to speak. He stood up from his prominent table near the front, adjusting his jacket with practiced elegance. He walked slowly and deliberately up the carpeted steps to the grand stage. He stepped behind the polished acrylic podium, gripping the edges tightly as he looked out over the sea of supportive faces. The spotlight hit him, illuminating his silver hair and solemn expression. He paused for a long, highly dramatic moment, allowing the silence to stretch and build intense anticipation. When he finally spoke, his voice was a deep, resonant rumble that perfectly filled the expansive ballroom. "My dear brothers and sisters," Vernon began, his tone dripping with manufactured humility, "we gather here tonight to celebrate charity, love, and the unbreakable bonds of our faith. But I must be completely honest with you all. This past week has been one of the darkest, most agonizing periods my family has ever faced." He paused again, bowing his head slightly and bringing a perfectly folded white handkerchief up to dab at his dry eyes. He was shedding fake tears, putting on an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. "We have faced severe trials and tribulations sent directly by the devil himself." Vernon continued, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "We have been viciously attacked, unjustly accused, and deeply betrayed by someone we loved and nurtured with all our hearts." He did not explicitly say Kendra's name, but he did not need to. Every single person in the room knew exactly who he was talking about. Beatrice, sitting at the front table, dabbed her own eyes, playing the role of the heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. Sometimes, the darkest evil disguises itself as corporate success and worldly wealth. He warned, his voice rising in passionate, righteous indignation. "Sometimes the devil uses the people closest to us to test our faith and tear down our holy foundations. He tries to use jealousy and bitter greed to fracture the righteous. But we will absolutely not be broken by these vicious lies. We will stand firm in our unyielding righteousness, knowing that the Lord always protects his faithful servants from malicious, greedy attacks. We know the truth, and we know that justice will ultimately prevail against the wicked. The massive crowd erupted into thunderous, validating applause. They stood to their feet cheering wildly for a man currently out on bail for federal grand larceny. Vernon smiled gracefully, waving to the standing ovation. His brazen facade was absolutely flawless, completely hiding the fact that his entire world was about to permanently collapse around him in a spectacular, completely unavoidable and intensely brutal public fashion before the night was completely over. He had no idea what was coming, but the utter devastation of his golden image was absolutely inevitable and entirely deserved right here and right now today. The thunderous applause was still echoing through the cavernous ballroom when the heavy oak double doors at the back of the hall suddenly swung open with a violent, resounding crash. The heavy brass handles struck the pristine walls, instantly shattering the manufactured atmosphere of righteous celebration. Every single head in the massive room snapped toward the entrance. The wealthy congregants, frozen mid-clap, stared in absolute confusion as the grand entrance unfolded before them. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the soft murmur of elite socialization died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence that sucked the air from the room. Kendra stepped across the threshold, her posture projecting absolute, unyielding authority. She wore a tailored black power suit that cut a sharp, commanding silhouette against the brightly lit entrance. Julian walked perfectly in step beside her, his expression a mask of cold, clinical determination. They were not alone. Flanking them was a formidable wall of highly intimidating professionals. On their left marched 4 senior litigators from Titan Entertainment Group, each carrying thick, heavily indexed legal briefcases. On their right strode 2 fully uniformed federal marshals, their silver badges gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, their hands resting naturally near their duty belts. The visual impact of this heavily armed corporate legal strike team entering a church charity gala was completely paralyzing. The crowd parted instinctively, forming a wide, perfectly clear path straight down the center aisle. Kendra and Julian marched forward, their footsteps echoing loudly against the polished marble floors. The silence in the ballroom became so profound that the soft rustle of silk gowns and the nervous clearing of throats sounded like rolling thunder. No one dared to speak. No one dared to step in their way. They moved with the terrifying, unstoppable momentum of a tidal wave, preparing to crush a fragile sandcastle. Up on the brightly illuminated stage, Vernon completely froze. His arms were still raised in a posture of victorious triumph, but his face had drained of all color. The arrogant, self-righteous smile slid right off his face, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium so hard his knuckles turned stark white. Down at the front table, Beatrice let out a short, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat as she stared in absolute horror at the approaching group. Darius, seated beside his mother, physically shrank back into his expensive chair, trying desperately to become invisible. "Security!" Vernon suddenly screamed, his voice cracking into a high, panicked screech that echoed horribly through the sophisticated sound system. He frantically waved his hand toward the edges of the ballroom. "Guards, remove these people immediately. They are trespassing. They are dangerous criminals. Remove them right now." 2 large private security guards hired for the gala stepped forward from the shadows, moving to intercept Kendra and Julian. The 2 federal marshals simply stepped out from the formation, directly blocking the guards' paths. The marshals did not draw their weapons or raise their voices. They simply flashed their federal credentials and offered a single, universally understood look of absolute authority. The private security guards immediately backed down, raising their hands in surrender and retreating quickly into the shadows. They recognized federal jurisdiction when they saw it, and they were not about to interfere with a federal operation. Julian did not even break his stride. He glided smoothly up the carpeted steps of the stage, his eyes locked entirely on Vernon. Vernon tried to back away, but his legs seemed glued to the floor. He opened his mouth to shout another desperate command, but no sound came out. Julian stepped directly up to the podium. He did not shove Vernon aside or act with any physical aggression. He simply reached out with smooth clinical precision and firmly gripped the microphone stand. He completely ignored Vernon's frantic, trembling presence, treating him like an entirely insignificant obstacle. Julian adjusted the microphone slightly, testing the audio feed. The resulting electronic hum echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. He did not raise his voice. He did not attempt to match Vernon's previous theatrical volume. Instead, he spoke in a perfectly flat, highly measured conversational tone that carried a terrifying weight of absolute certainty. The contrast between Vernon's hysterical screaming and Julian's ice-cold professionalism made Julian's words cut through the room like a surgical scalpel. "Good evening," Julian announced, his voice projecting clearly to every corner of the massive space. "My name is Julian Hayes. I represent the Executive Security Division of Titan Entertainment Group. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but we are here to execute a federal mandate regarding a severe ongoing criminal conspiracy involving one of your prominent speakers tonight." A collective synchronized gasp rippled through the hundreds of seated congregants. People exchanged shocked, horrified glances. Vernon tried to grab the microphone back, his hands shaking violently, but one of the federal marshals stepped up onto the stage, placing a heavy restraining hand firmly on Vernon's shoulder. Vernon immediately froze, completely trapped under the weight of federal authority. Julian casually unbuttoned his suit jacket and produced a thick, professionally bound legal document. He opened it slowly, flattening the pages against the podium. "What you just heard from this stage was a masterclass in deception," Julian stated calmly, his dark eyes scanning the front rows where the head pastors and senior church officials sat in stunned silence. "Vernon Wilson did not suffer trials and tribulations sent by the devil. He is currently out on bail after being arrested last night inside my private residence. He was apprehended by the Atlanta Police Department while actively committing felony breaking and entering and felony grand larceny." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked murmurs and outraged whispers. The head pastors in the front row leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of deep confusion and dawning horror. Julian raised a hand demanding silence, and the room instantly quieted down again, eager to hear the rest of the devastating truth. Julian turned his attention directly to the senior church leadership seated below him. He gestured to the corporate litigators standing at the base of the stage. The lawyers stepped forward, simultaneously opening their heavy briefcases. They began methodically distributing thick, highly organized manila folders directly to the head pastors and the highest-ranking members of the church board. The folders were pristine, labeled with bold red confidential stickers. "We believe in absolute transparency." Julian continued reading smoothly from his certified legal document. "The folders you are currently receiving contain undeniably verified, legally certified evidence of multiple federal crimes orchestrated by the man currently standing on this stage alongside his wife and his son. We are providing this evidence directly to church leadership because Vernon Wilson has actively weaponized this congregation, attempting to use your faith and your charitable resources as a shield against federal prosecution." One of the head pastors, a venerable man with silver hair, slowly opened the folder handed to him. His eyes widened dramatically as he reviewed the top document. "Page 1 of your packet details a massive wire fraud and grand larceny conspiracy," Julian instructed, guiding the leadership through the catastrophic evidence. 3 days ago, Vernon and Darius Wilson illegally bypassed corporate security measures to steal a highly customized $300,000 vehicle belonging to Titan Entertainment Group. Page 2 contains the officially authenticated Department of Motor Vehicles transfer forms. You will clearly see that Vernon Wilson intentionally and maliciously forged his own daughter's signature to illegally sell this stolen vehicle to a known highly dangerous black market buyer. Beatrice let out a loud, pathetic wail from her table, burying her face in her hands. The congregants surrounding her instantly recoiled, pulling their chairs away from her table, as if she had suddenly become infectious. The collective disgust in the room was rapidly turning the atmosphere highly toxic. Page 4 outlines the illegal cryptocurrency transaction they used to hide the illicit funds. Julian continued, his voice absolutely relentless, never wavering for a single second. Page 5 contains the official Atlanta Police Department arrest records from last night. Facing violent retribution from their criminal associates, Vernon and Darius Wilson deliberately used an illegally cloned electronic keycard to bypass high-security protocols at our private penthouse. They illegally entered the premises, and attempted to steal a vintage watch collection valued at over $200,000 to pay off their black market debts. The silence in the room was completely shattered by loud, aggressive murmurs of profound outrage. The people who had cheered for Vernon minutes ago were now staring at him with absolute, unadulterated revulsion. The respected church elder was being publicly, methodically exposed as a desperate, reckless, highly incompetent criminal. Julian flipped a page in his document. The final pages of your packet contain certified bank records. In order to secure bail after their arrest for this home invasion, Beatrice Wilson completely liquidated her entire retirement fund and drained all their remaining life savings. The Wilsons are currently entirely bankrupt, facing severe federal prison sentences, and are actively under investigation by multiple federal agencies. They came here tonight to solicit your sympathy and ultimately your financial donations under completely fraudulent pretenses. They are actively attempting to steal from this church to fund their criminal defense. The head pastor slammed his folder shut, his face turning a deep, furious shade of crimson. He stood up abruptly, pointing a trembling finger directly at Vernon. "Is this true, Vernon?" the pastor demanded, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. "Did you bring the police into this holy sanctuary with your wicked criminal lies?" Vernon could not speak. His mouth opened and closed silently. Sweat poured down his face, completely ruining his crisp tuxedo collar. He looked desperately at his wife, but Beatrice was paralyzed by her own public humiliation, entirely unable to offer any defense. Darius had completely slid down in his chair, attempting to hide from the hundreds of furious judging eyes burning into them. Kendra stepped up to the podium, standing shoulder to shoulder with Julian. She did not look at the crowd. She looked directly at her father. The sheer panic in his eyes was absolute. "You tried to use this community to hide your absolute incompetence," Kendra said, her voice carrying a sharp, icy clarity that silenced the remaining murmurs in the massive room. "You tried to paint me as the villain because I refused to let you destroy my life to cover your debts. You lied to these people just like you lied to the authorities and just like you lied to yourself. But the truth is entirely out now. Your facade is completely dead." Kendra looked down at the head pastor. "We have provided you with all the necessary legal documentation. What you do with this information and how you handle the criminals within your congregation is entirely up to your organizational leadership. We will not disrupt your charitable evening any further." Julian calmly closed his legal binder. He stepped away from the microphone, leaving Vernon standing completely exposed and completely destroyed under the harsh spotlight. The federal marshals stepped back, joining Kendra and Julian as they formed up with the legal team. They turned perfectly in unison and began their long, measured walk back down the center aisle toward the heavy oak doors. As they walked, the crowd did not whisper. They simply stared in absolute stunned silence, watching the ultimate destruction of the Wilson family legacy. The sound of their coordinated footsteps echoed like a final, devastating judgment. Behind them, the head pastor loudly demanded that Vernon step down from the stage immediately, instructing the remaining private security to escort the entire Wilson family off the church property permanently. The perfect, arrogant facade was entirely obliterated, leaving nothing behind but the cold, undeniable truth of their absolute ruin. But Kendra was not quite finished. Before the heavy oak doors could swing shut, she suddenly stopped. Julian paused beside her, a knowing glint in his dark eyes. The federal marshals halted their formation, seamlessly adjusting to her sudden change in momentum. The congregation, still reeling from the devastating revelations and the head pastor's furious demands, fell silent once more. They watched in absolute fascination as Kendra turned on her heels and marched deliberately back down the center aisle. She bypassed the retreating security guards and walked straight back up the carpeted steps of the main stage. Vernon, who had been trembling uncontrollably and preparing to flee, froze like a cornered animal. Kendra approached the acrylic podium and smoothly took the microphone back from the head pastor, who willingly stepped aside. She had one final lethal blow: to deliver a piece of information so toxic it would permanently salt the earth of the Wilson family legacy. She signaled to the audiovisual technician, stationed in the elevated sound booth at the back of the massive ballroom. Instantly, the three colossal high-definition screens mounted behind the pulpit flickered to life. The screens normally displayed serene images of rolling clouds and inspirational scriptures. Tonight they displayed a stark, highly detailed certified legal document. The stark white background and heavy black text dominated the entire room, forcing every single eye to read the undeniable truth projected in massive, glowing letters. It was a formal vehicle title bearing the official seals of the state and the federal government. Vernon stared up at the massive screens, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He recognized the document immediately. It was the original, unaltered title for the custom luxury McLaren he and Darius had stolen from Titan Entertainment Group. But there was a critical section highlighted in bright, unmistakable yellow on the digital projection. Kendra tapped the podium, demanding the absolute attention of the thousands of congregants staring at the screens. "Look closely at the designated beneficiary," Kendra instructed, her voice ringing out with crystal-clear authority. "You all assume my father and brother simply stole $250,000 vehicle from a wealthy corporation. That alone is a severe federal crime, a felony that carries years in a federal penitentiary. However, the reality of their malicious greed is far more insidious and far more deeply personal to every single person sitting in this room tonight." The crowd leaned forward collectively. The highlighted section on the massive screens clearly listed Titan Entertainment Group as the donor, but the receiving entity was not a corporate subsidiary. The receiving entity was listed in bold, undeniable print as the Buckhead Megachurch At-Risk Youth Charity Fund. Gasps erupted across the front rows as the senior leadership read the text. That specific charity fund was the exact program Vernon Wilson was personally appointed to manage. Kendra let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch for a long moment, allowing the brutal reality to fully sink into the minds of the congregation. Titan Entertainment officially donated that custom McLaren to this exact church, Kendra revealed, her voice slicing through the thick tension. It was explicitly earmarked to be the centerpiece of the silent auction happening in the adjoining hall later this very evening. The proceeds from that specific vehicle were designated to completely fund the downtown youth shelter for the next 5 years. My father knew exactly what that car was, and he knew exactly who it belonged to. Kendra turned her piercing gaze directly onto Vernon. He looked entirely broken, physically shrinking away from her under the blinding spotlights. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal was no longer just a corporate matter. It was a direct, violent assault on the very community he claimed to lead and protect. Kendra leaned into the microphone, spelling out the absolute truth slowly and deliberately, ensuring every syllable struck with maximum devastation. "You did not just steal from a faceless corporation," Dad Kendra stated, her words dropping like heavy stones into the silent ballroom. "You stole directly from the orphans of your own congregation. You stole the shelter, the food, and the educational funding from the most vulnerable children in this city. And you did it simply to fund Tasha's luxury vacation. You robbed at-risk youth to pay a black market buyer because you and Darius were too arrogant to face the consequences of your own pathetic, desperate greed." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a massive, destructive explosion. Beatrice let out a horrifying guttural wail from her table, finally realizing the inescapable magnitude of the social execution occurring before her eyes. She grabbed her emerald silk gown, sobbing hysterically into the fabric. Darius covered his face with his hands, weeping openly, his fragile ego completely shattered by the exposure of his profound cowardice. Tasha, who had sneaked into the back of the ballroom hoping to film the gala for her social media, suddenly found herself the center of highly unwanted attention. The crowd began turning their heads, looking for the woman whose luxury lifestyle was funded by stolen charity money. The initial shock finally wore off, and the entire congregation erupted in sheer, unadulterated fury. The noise was deafening. Thousands of people, many of whom had donated their hard-earned money to that exact youth charity, began shouting in absolute outrage. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer gowns stood up, pointing furiously at Vernon, Beatrice, and Darius. The murmurs of support from just an hour ago had completely evaporated, replaced by a toxic wave of furious condemnation. Cries of thief and hypocrite echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The sheer hypocrisy of Vernon standing on that stage, shedding fake tears and quoting scripture while actively robbing orphans, was entirely unforgivable. The head pastor, his face purple with righteous anger, marched furiously back to the center of the stage. He grabbed the microphone stand from Kendra, who willingly stepped back, allowing the church leadership to handle their own internal justice. Vernon Wilson, the head pastor, roared, his voice booming over the enraged crowd. The fury in his tone silenced the screaming congregants, replacing the chaos with a tense, expectant hush. By the authority vested in me by the board of directors and the entire congregation of the Buckhead Megachurch, I am formally and permanently stripping you of your elder status, effective immediately. You are a disgrace to this community, a disgrace to your family, and a disgrace to the very faith you claim to uphold. You have violated our deepest trust and stolen from the children we are sworn to protect. Your presence here is an absolute insult to everything we stand for. The head pastor signaled aggressively to the private security team. "Remove this man and his family from our sanctuary right now," he commanded loudly. "Do not let them take anything with them. If they resist, call the local authorities to assist the federal marshals." Vernon stumbled backward, his legs finally giving out. He fell hard onto the carpeted stage, a pathetic, weeping mess of a man. The private security guards, no longer intimidated, rushed forward. They grabbed Vernon by the arms of his tailored tuxedo, hauling him roughly to his feet. Beatrice and Darius were similarly surrounded by stern security personnel, their path to the exit completely blocked by furious judging church members. At the back of the expansive ballroom, Tasha's night turned into a spectacular nightmare. Several of her so-called influencer friends, the very people she had invited to witness her triumphant return to high society, immediately turned their smartphone cameras directly onto her. Their faces registered pure disgust as they live-streamed her absolute humiliation to thousands of eager followers online. They zoomed in on her panicked expression, capturing every second of her spectacular downfall. Tasha tried to cover her face, stumbling backward toward the exit, but the heavy wooden doors were blocked by the relentless crowd of influencers eager for viral content. She was trapped entirely exposed as a fraudulent parasite who benefited from stolen charity funds. The golden, arrogant facade the Wilson family had so desperately clung to was entirely permanently obliterated. There was no recovering from this. Kendra and Julian rejoined the Titan legal team and the federal marshals, leaving the chaotic, screaming ballroom behind them. They walked out into the cool Atlanta night, leaving the toxic ruins of the Wilson family legacy completely destroyed in their wake. The massive, heavily carved oak doors swung totally shut behind them, abruptly cutting off the overwhelming, deafening sound of a once untouchable family being aggressively dragged out by the angry crowd. Kendra finally took a deep, deeply cleansing breath of the fresh, crisp evening air. The absolute, inescapable truth had finally won the war. The toxic cycle was completely, permanently broken today. The future belonged entirely to her, now free of their relentless, malicious greed, forever and always securing her absolute, unyielding peace today. 3 months evaporated in a relentless storm of legal subpoenas, court appearances, and absolute financial ruin. The spectacular implosion at the charity gala had been merely the opening act of their ultimate destruction. Vernon Wilson, once a respected elder and a man who believed his own arrogant lies, found himself completely crushed beneath the grinding wheels of the justice system. The shady black market buyer, out $250,000, and deeply enraged by the public spectacle, decided against violent street retaliation. Instead, he employed a team of vicious, high-priced civil litigators to destroy Vernon completely today. They filed a massive, inescapable lawsuit against Vernon, burying him in a mountain of civil judgments. The legal fees alone acted as a giant vacuum, instantly sucking dry any hidden accounts or emergency funds Vernon had desperately tried to conceal. With the family finances completely obliterated and their reputations turned to toxic ash, the bank moved with ruthless speed, Foreclosure notices were plastered across the heavy mahogany front doors of the Buckhead mansion. The eviction was swift, brutal, and utterly humiliating. Vernon and Beatrice were forced to stand on the perfectly manicured lawn and watch absolutely everything totally disappear today. Cold, unfeeling bank representatives systematically changed the locks on their sprawling estate. The luxury vehicles were swiftly repossessed by aggressive tow trucks. The expensive Persian rugs and custom furniture were seized to satisfy mounting debts. They were left with nothing but a few suitcases of basic clothing and the crushing weight of their absolute failure. Their new reality was a tiny, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment located on the extreme rundown outskirts of Atlanta. The contrast was physically sickening. Instead of crystal chandeliers and marble floors, Beatrice now stared blankly at peeling yellow wallpaper and stained linoleum kitchen flooring right today. The air in the cramped space constantly smelled of damp mildew and cheap cooking oil from the neighboring units. The sounds of police sirens and domestic disputes echoed through the thin, poorly insulated walls every single night. Vernon sat in a sagging second-hand armchair in the corner of the tiny living room, staring vacantly at a blank wall. He had lost his church, his wealth, his status, and his pride. Beatrice wept silently over a rusted sink washing cheap dishes by hand, because they could no longer afford the basic luxury of a modern, functioning kitchen appliance absolutely anywhere today. Their arrogant delusions of grandeur had directly purchased them a lifetime ticket to absolute poverty and irrelevance. While Vernon and Beatrice decayed in their miserable new surroundings, Darius faced a far more terrifying reality. The federal government did not forget, and they certainly did not forgive. 3 months after the disastrous penthouse raid, a federal grand jury officially indicted Darius Wilson on multiple felony counts. The charges read like a masterclass in ruined potential. He was formally charged with federal wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, breaking and entering, and grand larceny. The highly motivated federal prosecutors possessed a massive mountain today. They held indisputable evidence, including the cloned key card, the recovered security footage, and the digital paper trail from the cryptocurrency scam. Darius was staring down the barrel of a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant golden boy who had once sneered at his sister's corporate success was now reduced to a terrified, weeping defendant in a sterile federal courtroom. The absolute finality of the indictment triggered the ultimate betrayal from the one person Darius thought remained on his side. Tasha had watched the total evaporation of the Wilson family wealth with completely cold, extremely calculating eyes. She had initially tried to spin the charity gala disaster into a sympathetic narrative for her followers, but the internet was utterly unforgiving. Her comment sections were flooded with thousands of angry users exposing her hypocrisy. When the federal indictment was officially unsealed, Tasha realized the money was completely and permanently gone. Darius was no longer a ticket to luxury. He was a massive, toxic anchor dragging her personal brand into the abyss. Tasha did not hesitate. Without a single ounce of genuine emotion, she coldly served Darius with official divorce papers right in the middle of completely serious proceedings today. She ambushed him during his legal consultations. She did not offer an explanation or a tearful goodbye. She simply handed over the thick manila envelope and walked away, her mind entirely focused on salvaging her non-existent social media career. Less than an hour later, Tasha launched a highly produced, heavily edited video broadcast across all her digital platforms. She publicly and viciously disavowed the entire Wilson family. She stared into the camera with perfectly applied sad makeup, claiming she had been entirely deceived by Darius and his completely ruined parents. She painted herself as the ultimate highly innocent victim today. She aggressively threw Darius under the proverbial bus to save her own skin. She legally severed all ties, leaving Darius completely isolated, facing federal prison without a wife, without a family fortune, and without a shred of dignity. In stark, brilliant contrast to the dark, miserable collapse of the Wilson family, Kendra experienced an absolute meteoric rise. The corporate atmosphere inside the towering glass and steel headquarters of Titan Entertainment Group crackled with electric success. The board of directors had watched Kendra navigate the catastrophic internal theft and the massive public relations nightmare with completely flawless, absolutely clinical precision today. She had not panicked. She had not let personal family ties cloud her professional judgment. Instead, she had orchestrated a perfectly legal, airtight counteroffensive that protected the company's assets and completely neutralized the threat. Kendra sat at the head of the massive obsidian conference table, surrounded by the highest-ranking executives in the entire corporation. The CEO, a formidable man who rarely handed out compliments, stood at the front of the room. He projected a commanding presence as he addressed the assembled board. He spoke loudly and clearly about Kendra's unwavering dedication and her absolutely razor-sharp corporate intellect today. He praised her absolute refusal to compromise the integrity of Titan Entertainment Group. He highlighted the recovery of the stolen McLaren and the flawless execution of the police sting operation at the penthouse. Kendra had transformed a potential corporate disaster into a massive demonstration of the company's impenetrable security and unyielding legal power. With a warm, genuine smile, the CEO officially announced Kendra's immediate promotion to Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy and Acquisitions. The boardroom erupted into thunderous, authentic applause. These were not the fake, hypocritical cheers of a manipulated church congregation offering their blindly foolish communal support today. This was the genuine, hard-earned respect of industry titans acknowledging one of their own. Kendra stood up, buttoning her tailored suit jacket, and offered a confident, gracious nod to the board. She had earned every single piece of this victory through sheer brilliance and unshakable resilience. Later that afternoon, Kendra stood in her new, sprawling corner office on the top floor of the Titan Tower. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The beautiful afternoon sun cast a very warm, distinctly golden light across her pristine mahogany desk surface today. The light illuminated the modern art decorating the walls. Julian walked into the office holding 2 crystal glasses of expensive celebratory champagne. He handed her a glass, his dark eyes shining with intense pride and deep affection. He gently clinked his glass against hers, the clear, bright sound ringing beautifully in the quiet luxury of the massive office. They stood side by side, looking out over the sprawling city below them. Kendra took a slow sip of the champagne, letting the crisp, cold liquid wash away any lingering traces of the past. The entirely toxic emotional weight was completely gone. The suffocating burden of her parents and her brother was completely removed, permanently erased from her orbit. She had cut the poison out of her life with absolute finality. Down in the dark, miserable outskirts of the city, Vernon and Beatrice were drowning in their self-inflicted poverty. Darius was heading to a federal cell, completely abandoned by his fake wife. But up here, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Kendra had found her ultimate triumph. She had built an empire of truth, power, and genuine love. She leaned her head firmly against Julian's broad shoulder today. She smiled softly at the beautiful, limitless horizon stretching out before them, finally enjoying the absolute, unbroken peace of her spectacular, unyielding success. The battle was definitively over, and she had emerged entirely victorious. Every calculated step, every painful decision had meticulously paved the road to this exact pinnacle of achievement. She took another sip of champagne, feeling the vibrant energy of the city humming far below. She had reclaimed her narrative, completely crushing the shadows of her past. She was a true force of nature, untouchable, brilliant, and ready to conquer whatever the brilliant future held for her today. Later that evening, the oppressive southern heat finally broke. A massive, heavy thunderstorm rolled aggressively into Atlanta, swallowing the gleaming city skyline in violent flashes of brilliant white lightning and deafening crashes of rolling thunder. Thick, relentless sheets of rain battered the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Kendra's luxurious penthouse. She slid the heavy glass door open, stepping out onto the expansive covered balcony. The cool, damp air instantly washed over her face, a sharp contrast to the warm, perfectly climate-controlled interior. She wore a stunning emerald green silk robe that billowed slightly in the fierce howling storm. In her right hand, she held a delicate crystal flute, the expensive vintage champagne bubbling softly against the glass. Her personal cell phone vibrated violently against the glass patio table. The bright screen illuminated the dark balcony, cutting through the deep shadows cast by the storm. An unknown number flashed across the digital display. Kendra stared at it for a long, quiet moment. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, letting the crisp, complex flavors settle on her tongue before she finally reached out. She pressed the glowing green button to calmly accept the incoming call from him. She brought the expensive phone up to her ear. She did not say a single word. She simply waited, letting the heavy sound of the falling rain echo loudly through the receiver. Kendra! A voice rasped quietly through the speaker. It was Vernon. The arrogance, the booming theatrical confidence, the righteous authority was entirely gone. His voice was completely shattered, reduced to a pathetic, wet wheeze that barely resembled the proud man who had once commanded thousands from a brightly lit megachurch stage. The background noise on his end was totally chaotic, filled with overwhelming despair and absolute misery. She heard the unmistakable harsh sound of heavy rain hitting a cheap metal awning, the roar of passing highway traffic, and the distant blaring siren of a police cruiser. "I am at a motel out on the interstate," Vernon sobbed, his voice cracking horribly under the weight of his absolute failure. "The bank took the last of the cash today. Beatrice is extremely sick. We have absolutely nothing left in this world." Kendra leaned heavily against the cold metal railing of her balcony, looking out over the sprawling, electrified grid of downtown Atlanta shining brightly through the pouring heavy rain. She watched the bright headlights of thousands of cars moving like tiny glowing ants far below her. She felt absolutely nothing inside. There was no pity, no guilt, and absolutely no lingering sense of familial obligation. The emotional well had been entirely drained, leaving behind a smooth, impenetrable surface of pure, solid ice. She swirled the champagne in her flute, watching the golden liquid catch the bright reflection of a nearby lightning strike. "Please," Kendra Vernon begged again, his wet sobs echoing pathetically through the quiet phone. "We are your parents. You are our daughter. We are your true family. I know we made terrible mistakes. I know I was wrong about everything. But we are truly desperate today. I'm standing outside in the freezing rain. We cannot pay for another night in this filthy, disgusting room. I just need a small loan right now. Just enough money to get us back on our feet today. A safe place to stay tonight. Anything you can offer. You have so much success now. Please have some basic mercy on us today." Kendra took another slow, highly measured sip of her crisp drink. The expensive vintage champagne tasted like absolute victory. She listened to the pathetic, wet coughing of the broken man who had actively tried to destroy her career forever. This was the exact same person who had stolen directly from innocent orphans, just to successfully fund a pointless luxury lifestyle. He had gleefully thrown her under the heavy bus to save his own miserable skin. He had weaponized the sacred concept of family whenever it suited his malicious greed. Now he was desperately trying to use that exact same concept as a fragile shield against his entirely well-deserved ruin. The sheer hypocrisy of his pleas was truly staggering. Kendra simply continued to look out at the beautiful rain-soaked city skyline, feeling the incredible, undeniable power of her own absolute independence. She finally broke her silence, her voice slicing through the heavy static-filled connection like a newly sharpened surgical scalpel. "You need to learn independence at some point, Dad," Kendra stated very coldly, perfectly mirroring their exact highly dismissive words from so many years ago. "Enjoy the vacation." She did not wait for a single response. She absolutely did not want to hear his panicked, desperate protests or his sudden, highly predictable and angry screaming outbursts today. She simply pulled the sleek phone away from her ear and firmly pressed the bright red button, instantly severing the miserable connection forever. With clinical, ruthless efficiency, she quickly opened her digital contact settings and permanently blocked the unknown number. The final fragile digital tether to her incredibly toxic past was officially permanently destroyed right now. There would be absolutely no more desperate phone calls, no more manipulative emails, and no more dramatic weeping ambushes. They were entirely erased from her existence. Kendra smoothly turned her back on the raging storm and walked straight back inside her sprawling, beautiful penthouse. The heavy glass door slid tightly shut, instantly silencing the highly chaotic roar of the violent wind and pounding rain outside. The interior was a perfect sanctuary of absolute peace and breathtaking quiet luxury. Delicious savory aromas drifted gently from the stunning designer kitchen. Julian was waiting patiently for her at the elegant dining table, having prepared a beautiful, incredibly warm dinner. He offered a knowing, affectionate smile as she sat down entirely safe. The cinematic camera slowly pans out through the rain, revealing the gleaming, unbreakable city skyline below. It was total victory today. It was complete permanent severance.